iOS 18 is the most significant update in years, and I'm going to be showing you more than 500 new features and changes to prove it to you. And as tradition, this is a full-length film, so grab your snacks, grab your popcorn, throw this video up on the TV, and if you enjoy it, give this video a thumbs up. Let's jump in. Okay, so throughout this video, I'm going to have iOS 17 on the left, iOS 18 on the right. Let's start with the lock screen. So what do you notice is missing in iOS 18? Yes, it's the quick actions down below. The lock screen shortcuts can not only now be removed, but they can be customizable. So before, it was limited to just the flashlight and the camera, but now you can change that. So if you haptic press on your lock screen and go to customize and then go to your lock screen, you'll see that we now have these two plus arrows at the bottom. And when you tap on that, you can customize the actions. So let's say, for example, we want to open an app from our lock screen. We can go to open app right here, and then we can choose what application we want to open up. So if I ever want to quickly go into YouTube, I could just select YouTube, and now you'll see that we get this little YouTube icon down there. Now we're going to add another one over here. Let's do silent mode. So now when we go to our lock screen, we can just press one of these two quick actions at the bottom to either open up YouTube or go into silent mode. So we haptic press right there, and you can see I'm toggling between that mode, and you can see the different animations there, and same with YouTube. All I have to do is long press on that and it will open up YouTube for me. And the quick action controls that you choose will stay sticky to that specific wallpaper. So if we were to go to a different wallpaper, you will see different actions because again, you can customize them on a per wallpaper basis. But as I showed in the beginning, if you have a really nice lock screen wallpaper like this one from the Rewind wallpaper pack, it looks really good and just really clean if you completely remove those quick actions. There's also a new color for the clock up here. So if you go to the clock, you can see that we have a new gradient here in iOS 18 that was not there in iOS 17. So you can see kind of what that looks like when it's thick and thin. You cannot change the gradient. It's just stuck with those colors. And if you tap on the globe icon in the top left corner, you'll notice that we have several additional languages for the clock now. And also all of the languages are alphabetically sorted. We have a new dynamic wallpaper for iOS 18. So this shows up when you add a new wallpaper. You can see all of the different colors here. However, it might actually just shuffle through all of those colors if you set it to dynamic. So you can see when you add it to your lock screen, you can kind of toggle between the different colors. But if you go to the very beginning, it will change to dynamic. And this will actually change colors throughout the day. Also on the lock screen, if you get a message while in a focus mode, it will just say messages now instead of who actually sent the message. Before in iOS 17, instead of saying messages, it would just say the name of the contact. Okay, so now let's talk about the home screen, and this is where we're going to have a massive change from iOS 17. So take a look at iOS 17 and take a look at iOS 18 and tell me which one you would choose. Now you might choose the light icons and that's fine, but I personally like the dark icons a lot. So you'll notice that most of the third-party applications and first-party applications now have a dark mode variant, but this is not enabled by default. You need to haptic press on your home screen, and now you see that we have an edit button up in the top left-hand corner, whereas before that was a plus icon up there, and if you tap on that, we have a change here as well. So before, if you press that, it would just pull up the widgets that you can add, but now we get a menu here. So there's add widget, there's customize, and there's edit pages. So if you go into customize, this is where we get the menu down here in this bottom tray, and this is where you can change the icons from light mode, which will be on by default once you update to iOS 18. But if you want to change it to dark mode, you just simply select dark, and you'll also notice that your wallpaper got darker. You can tap on that to, return the wallpaper to its original state, but you can put that in kind of a darker mode there as well if you would like to. There's also an automatic mode, which will change, of course, based on, the sunrise and the sunset. And then we also have tinted. Now, tinted is really cool because you can see it kind of just adds this really nice tint to your icons and also to your widgets. You'll see this throughout everything on your home screen. So it's really neat, but there's more to this than meets the eye. So if you go back to customize and go to tinted, you can see you can change the hue of it right here. You can change the opacity of the color. And my personal favorite part is that we have a color picker here. So if you go to the color picker, you can now match it to a certain part of your wallpaper for a more precise, color and to get it matching perfectly. So if I go right here, you can see how that looks. Maybe I'm not a big fan. Maybe I want it to be more of the blue color. There we go. We can do that. And maybe we want it to be a little bit lighter. We can kind of just adjust this to our liking. And by the way, if you want to get any of these wallpapers, I will leave them linked down in the description below. And here's another example of how cool your home screen can look with those colored icons, so with those tinted icons. And you'll notice that when you change to a different lock screen, those icons also stick with that wallpaper. So here's another example. You can see, just like the lock screen, anytime you change the app icons, those will persist. Those will stick with the specific wallpaper. And this is just one of the reasons I think iOS 18 is such an awesome update, because you can finally, customize your iPhone to your liking. Like, you can just keep the classic white icons if you want to, but at least you have more flexibility now to do a lot more than you previously could. And if you want an ultra clean setup, you can also set your app icons right here from small to large. So if you select large, the app icons will get larger and it will remove the text underneath of the apps. So the app labels are gone, and that just gives you a really clean look on your home screen. Now, you've probably been wondering how I have this empty section up here in the top right of my home screen. And that's because now in iOS 18, you can move app icons outside of the traditional grid. So if you haptic press on your home screen to go into jiggle mode, take a look at this. I can move these app icons wherever I want. Not necessarily wherever I want. It still has to be, in the grid somewhere, but they do not have to be next to each other anymore. You can essentially move these app icons to pretty much wherever you want. And this gives you so much customizability for the home screen. And this is another reason I think that everybody's home screen after iOS 18 is going to look so different. There's also a really nice change to widgets in iOS 18. So in iOS 17, if I wanted to change the size of this music widget, I would just have to remove it and then add a new one with the correct size. But now in iOS 18, you'll notice that we have this little dragger icon in the bottom right. That's because we can now drag that to change the size on the fly. We no longer need to remove the entire widget and add a new one. We can change this to whatever size we would like, and you can see how smooth and fluid it is. And you can even make a widget from an app icon on your home screen without ever even going into jiggle mode. So for example, for podcasts, if I haptic press on podcasts, you can see that we now have a new menu there for changing the size of this app icon, which means that we can make it into a widget just by tapping right there. Boom. And that also means that you can change a widget back into an app icon. So if I haptic press on any of my widgets, I can just go ahead and press right there and it will turn it into an app icon. Same with this one right here. Press it and boom, it's into a music app icon. Now here is a feature I've been waiting on for over a decade. Now in iOS 18, you can hide and lock applications. So if you haptic press on an app icon, you'll now get a new menu option that says require Face ID. If you tap on that, it gives you a prompt after that that says, do you want to just require Face ID or do you want to also hide the application? So if you press require Face ID, it does just what you would think. So if I press that, it will scan my face and boom. So now if we try to open up Snapchat, it lets me, but you can see that you do have to enter in your passcode right once you go into the application. However, if you don't want somebody even knowing that the application is on your device, you can go to hide and require Face ID. So when you do that, it will scan your face and now you get this prompt that says hide Snapchat, and it says that it will be obscured and you will get no notifications, calls, or alerts from that application. So if you tap on hide application, it will do that and boom, it's gone. And you'll notice that if you go all the way over to the app library and go all the way to the bottom, there's now a new folder called hidden. And if you tap on that, it will ask to scan your face and you will see the two hidden applications that I have right there. And if you go into your settings and go down to the apps section and then go all the way down to the bottom, this is also where you'll see a menu option for hidden applications. So if you go into here, this is where you can see the settings for those hidden apps. And going back to the app library, there's a minor change here. So the background is no longer blurred. So before it used to blur the home screen wallpaper, now it is unblurred. And this will be very hard to portray through the video, but also in iOS 18, parallax icons are back. So this will lightly shift your wallpaper, your apps, and your alerts as you tilt your iPhone and kind of move it around. This was removed in iOS 16 and stayed absent on iOS 17, but now it's come back with iOS 18. And if you want to disable this, you just need to turn on reduce motion. And I had to change my wallpaper to something lighter for this next feature, but this is something that is so subtle, but it's what makes Apple Apple. So take a look at what happens when I press on the buttons. You see that little animation? There's this little animation that kind of comes out from the bezel of the iPhone, and it's super subtle, but it's just so cool, and it's so fluid and so nice. It also works on the side button over here as well, and also for the camera control button if you have the iPhone 16. Really small detail, but I love it. So we all know what the control center looks like in iOS 17. Well, take a look at iOS 18. Which control center do you like better? Because I think iOS 18 looks so much better with the circular icons, but it's not just the shape of the icons down here. It's also the extreme amount of customizability that you can do here. It's a complete redesign and rethinking of the control center. So first things first, let's not forget these top buttons up here. So you do have a little plus icon, which will allow you to add controls. So you no longer need to go into settings to add a control to the control center. Also up in the top right, we have a power button where you can haptic press on that to power down your phone. And just like with the widgets on the home screen, you can also resize all of your control center icons. So I have these all set up how I like it. So I'm just going to scroll down because you also have multiple pages. So you can have multiple pages of control center icons. So let's just go to add a control, and you'll notice that we get a vast selection of controls to choose from. You have everything from connectivity to your focus modes, HomeKit, now playing, remote, you have your utilities, you have accessibility, vision accessibility, you have pretty much anything you can think of in here. And plus you can also add shortcuts in here as well, which we'll talk about that in a moment, but that's an option in there as well. Now going back to the main control center page here, once you add your control center icons, you can also resize them just like you can with widgets on the home screen. So you have multiple different sizes for every widget, or at least most widgets, and you can just, change them around, move them around to wherever you would like, and you can make them larger. And you can see that the widgets around it just kind of move out of the way. It's really fluid and really nice, and again, so customizable. Now also, we do have multiple pages as I mentioned. So after you get past the main control center, pages where you can customize, we do also have a media page, which by the way, even though these are there by default, you can customize these even further as well. So if you wanted to make this, a little bit smaller and turn that into, another page like the first one, you can do that. But by default, it is large like this. And then below that, we have our HomeKit area. So we have our home devices in a separate area now on a separate page, which is very convenient. That way you don't accidentally press something when you pull down your control center all the time. Maybe it was just me, but if you go down to the end, we also have a connectivity tab where you have all your connectivity options, such as airplane mode, AirDrop, Wi-Fi, and so on. And here's just a side-by-side of the difference between the two. So before, if you wanted to get into the connectivity area like this on iOS 17, you just had to haptic press right there, and everything was just smaller and just so bundled together. Everything was just very congested in iOS 17. Now you have so much space in iOS 18 and so much customizability to set the control center to your liking. And another way to navigate through the control center is just to haptic press in this section, and you can kind of see this little animation and how each section kind of pops out there. So this is an easier way than just going through and scrolling and maybe accidentally pressing something. So just haptic press over here and you get a really nice fluid animation to go along with the switching of pages. And this is also like the home screen where nobody's control center is really going to look the same. And that's just awesome because that's not something that we're familiar with on iOS. Normally everybody's iPhone kind of looks the same, but now with the customizability on the lock screen, the home screen, and now the control center, pretty much nobody's iPhone is going to look the same, which I think is a big win for iOS. We also have a change to the Shazam glyph icon, so it looks a little bit different here in iOS 18. And also if you haptic press on that, we have a change here as well. So it doesn't just show your history by default, you can have it set to recognize music, and then also the option to show history. And there's also several changes to the glyph icons. So the flashlight glyph icon, it looks a little bit different. The flashlight is a tiny bit smaller. The calculator glyph icon has the new look for the updated calculator in iOS 18. The screen recording icon looks different, so the outline is less opaque and it's also a little bit thicker. Low power mode also has a change, so it's less opaque, Also, the battery percentage inside of the glyph icon shows as lower than it was in iOS 17. The camera icon has a thicker circle through the middle. The screen mirroring glyph icon has a change as well, so it's very similar to the other ones, and pretty much every icon has been changed. And also the little glyph inside of the circle is a little bit larger than it was on iOS 17 as well. And orientation lock is also different on iOS 18, both when it's enabled and disabled. Now, if we activate the flashlight, you can see a massive difference in the UI here. So the UI kind of lives up in the dynamic island now in iOS 18 and also in iOS 17. The only thing you could customize was the intensity of the flashlight beam, but now in iOS 18, you can not only increase the intensity by swiping up right here, but also the spread of it. So if you move your finger side to side, you can change the spread of the flashlight along with the intensity. And you can see the really nice animation there when you go up and also when you go and change the width of the beam for your flashlight. So really awesome. Try it out. And also check out the animation when we turn the flashlight off. Really nice. And by the way, when you turn the flashlight off in iOS 17, it just turns straight off. As you can see, just straight off. But in iOS 18, the flashlight fades out. It doesn't just go straight off, it kind of fades out. So if you go to the control center and add the background sounds control, we have new background sounds. So if you haptic press on that, we have two new ones down here. So night and fire. And by the way, like I mentioned earlier, you can add a shortcut into the control center. So if you wanted to open up an application quickly from the control center, you can now do that by adding a shortcut. So you can either use the pre-made open app or you can choose your own custom-made shortcut. So for example, I have one right here that will open up X when I tap on it. So I tap on it and boom, it opens up the application that I wanted. And same right here, if I press on this, it will open up messages for me to compose a new text message, which is very convenient on the fly. And speaking of control center toggles, if you have an action button, so if you have a 15 Pro or an iPhone 16 and you go to your action button settings, if you go over to controls, we now can quickly access your favorite control via the action button, which is really nice. If you want to quickly trigger dark mode, if you want to quickly, scan a QR code, quickly go into airplane mode, any of these that you want, you can do that by simply pressing and holding on the action button. You can even ping your watch from there. And there's also a new recognize music toggle as well. So if you have to press on that, you can see the animation up there. It will listen for the music and tell you what it is. And by the way, if you go into your focus modes, there is going to be a new reduce interruptions focus mode if you have an Apple Intelligence compatible iPhone, iPad, or Mac, and you've upgraded to iOS or iPadOS 18.1 or macOS 15.1. So this is the new, Apple Intelligence focus mode, which is really awesome. So if we go into our settings and go to focus, you will see reduce interruptions, even though I don't technically have that feature yet on my device. So if you get a message from somebody that may be important, it will break through your focus mode and show you this little notification up here with a really nice animation that's very Apple Intelligence-esque. And while we're talking about focus modes and Siri, let's go into our Siri settings. So it's now Siri and not Siri and search. Or if you're on iOS 18.1, you'll see Apple Intelligence and Siri. And if you go into those settings, you'll notice that we have a couple of changes here. So first off, it now says Siri requests instead of ask Siri. Also, there's no more press side button for Siri on this main page. It's now under the talk to Siri section. So if you go into talk to Siri, we now have the press side button for Siri right there. And if you go into accessibility and then down to Siri and then scroll down, you'll notice that we have some changes here as well. So before it said always listen for S or Hey S, now it just says always listen for S. Also, there's a new setting here called require Siri for interruptions. So it says when this is on, you have to say Siri or Hey S to interrupt a Siri response. And then below that, we have another new option for listen for atypical speech. So this will expand the speech patterns that Siri will listen for, and it will help improve speech recognition. So if Siri had a hard time understanding you in the past, enabling this might help Siri understand you better. The Messages application gets quite a few changes this year that I think you're going to love. So number one, if we go to tap back on a message, we have multiple changes here. So you can see iOS 17 on the left, iOS 18 on the right, multiple changes right away. So we have more colorful reactions up top, and we have additional reactions that we can give. So we have a recently used emoji right there, and we could also add any emoji that we would like. So if we scroll over, we can see some of our recently used emojis. And if you tap on the emoji icon, you can choose from the keyboard which emoji you would like to select as a reaction. And you can even react to a message with a sticker. Also in group chats, if multiple people react to the same message, it now has them separated, whereas in iOS 17, they were all stacked together. If you tap and hold on that message, it also shows the individual. So if there's two ha-has, it will show both individuals right there underneath of it, whereas before it just showed two and you had to tap on it to see who the other person was who reacted with the ha-ha in this instance. You can now send multiple stickers in a single message, and you can combine stickers with emojis. So you can see I have a sticker and an emoji there. In iOS 17, that was not possible. It would send the sticker as an image and then the emoji would be separate. And same with stickers. You could only send one sticker at a time. It would ask you to replace it if you tried to select two, but now you can send multiple stickers and even combine them with emojis. If you start typing out a message, you'll notice a new A icon right here to the far right in the predictive text field. If you tap on that, you can see that you now have the option to send text effects for individual words or characters. So before in iOS 17, you could do similar, effects right there, but it was only if you tapped and held on the send button, and then you had the option to send the whole message with an effect. But now you can do that for individual words. So if I wanted to maybe make best stand out in this message, I can let's just do explode. So now you can see it will send it like that. So if I go ahead and send that, here's what it looks like when it does that little animation. So that's pretty awesome. But it goes even further because we also have the option to format. So we now have text formatting in the Messages application, which means that we can bold items, we can italicize items. So if we go over here and italicize that, we can underline. So if we go here and underline, and we can also strike through. So you can do them all in the same message as well if you would like to, and it will show up that way for the recipient as long as they're on iOS 18. Now here is a feature I've been waiting on for a long time. Now with iOS 18, you can schedule iMessages to send up to 2 weeks in advance. So maybe if you just remembered that it's somebody's birthday and you don't want to forget in 2 weeks, you can now schedule to send that message on your behalf. So once you type out the message, just tap the plus icon to the left of the text field and look for the send later option. If you don't see that, you could just scroll down and it should show up right here. So once you select send later, you get the option to choose your date. And again, this goes up to 2 weeks in advance, and you can really narrow this down to the exact time that you want to send it. Now, once you select the time that you want, just hit send right there, and you will see that we now have a send later option above that, and it will show it. And if you tap on edit, you have the option to send it right away. You can edit the time, or you can delete the message. And the best part about this feature is that even if your device is turned off or if you don't have signal, it will still send to that person because it is currently being stored in the iMessage servers. If a link is shared in iMessage, it will now adopt the dominant color of the content, and it will fill in the gray areas with that color. So they look a lot cleaner now in iOS 18 compared to iOS 17. You also get more control over how the links are viewed, how they're formatted in messages. So if you go and paste a link in here and then you tap on that link, we have multiple options now. So you can customize that. So if it's supported, you can choose between 2 different looks for how that link will look in line in the message. And you also have the option to convert to text link. That way it only sends it as the text and not the embed of the video. So easily the biggest change coming to messages this year is RCS support. So now with iOS 18, we officially have RCS support, which means that we can text with Android users and get pretty much all of the benefits that we get with iMessage users, aside from their bubbles remaining green. So we now have text indicators. You can now see typing indicators when somebody on Android is typing. You now have read receipts. So if they have that enabled, you will now see when they read your messages. But the best part is that you won't receive videos like this anymore. This really grainy, super low res video that we used to see when videos were sent from Android to iPhone over MMS. So now MMS is a thing of the past. Now the videos will show up in their full resolution, normal size, and they won't be super grainy and unwatchable like they were in the past, which is huge. Audio messages are also possible on RCS. So if you tap on the plus right here and go to audio, it will actually allow you to send an audio message to somebody that is on Android. There's also no character limit, so you can type out as much as you want, just like on iMessages. You can also react to messages with emojis, and the person on the Android phone will see your reaction just as you do. And you can also now text somebody on Android over Wi-Fi, just like you can with iMessage. So if you're like me and you have that one group chat where there's only 1 or 2 people in there with an Android phone and it completely ruins the experience, group chats are about to get a lot better and more bearable with iOS 18 thanks to RCS. And if you go into your settings and go to messages, there's also a new option for RCS messaging right here. So if you go into that, there is a toggle to turn that on. And if you go down to the very bottom, we have business messages. And in here, you can turn Apple messages for business on, and RCS will work for business messaging as well if you're messaging with Microsoft, and it will show their full name and photo now. You can now send images up to 100 megabytes at full resolution in iMessage. So you can see this size of this file right here is 105 megabytes, and I was able to send that to another iPhone via iMessage. Meanwhile, I tried that on iOS 17 and it failed. It just said not delivered. So you can now send images at full resolution up to 100 megabytes. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you go into your settings and then go all the way down to the bottom for messages, the low quality image mode has been enhanced with iOS 18. So if you have this on to send compressed images, it has improved for retaining more detail. The new math notes feature, which we'll talk about later on, works in messages. So how this works in the messages app is you could just type out a math problem, and once you type in equals, it will solve that for you. So you can see that you could either just insert the answer only, or you can insert right here to have the full equation with the solution. So if I go back and I just select the solution, you could also select to only have that entered in as well. But where this is really useful is with currency conversion. So if you're texting somebody from another country and you type in the dollar amount and you just put $97 and then you put equals, you can see instantly that that is 86.65 euros. So you can now send it that way. This update also brings messages via satellite. So you can now send messages if you're off the grid and you have no signal. Now this does require the iPhone 14 or later, but there's a new section in settings so you can learn how this works. We have the satellite connection demo. If you go ahead and enable that, you can see this really cool animation here. It's trying to get a clear view of the sky to connect with a satellite, and take a look at this. So it's looking for signal and it found a satellite behind me. So you have to point it at that satellite, and it basically is showing you, if you were in this position, what you're going to do. So now we can tap on end demo, and this is what the interface looks like in here. So you can not only message, emergency contacts, but you can also request roadside assistance. And if you go into there, it says if you need help with your vehicle, you can contact a roadside service provider when Wi-Fi and cellular are not available. So this can it will quite literally save lives. So we had emergency SOS before where you can make phone calls and send messages before, but now it gets a little bit more advanced with iOS 18. Also new in CarPlay is that the iMessage notifications now include contact photos. They didn't show photos in iOS 17. In the phone application, we now have T9 dialing. So if I wanted to type out Apple, we have A under 2, P is 7, it's 2 P's, and then we have L for 5, and then 3 for E, and you can see that we can see Apple right here. So these are different Apple contacts, and if we go to 4 more, it will show all of the results right there. So I have multiple people from Apple in the contacts, and we also have new options over here on the right for calling or FaceTiming them. And if you start typing in somebody's number and you want to add them to contacts, before in iOS 17, we just had a simple add number text beneath the number, but now in iOS 18, we have a little glyph icon up in the top left. And if we press on that, we now have new glyph icons in here as well to the right of create new contact and next to add to existing contact. If you go to your recents tab, we now have a search bar. So you can now search for any recent calls that you've had. There's a new live voicemail UI. So the whole interface has been updated in iOS 18. So we have iOS 17 on the left, iOS 18 on the right. So we now have more details about what is actually showing here. So it gives you information about the live voicemail. And then after it's done, you can see in iOS 17, it just said that a voicemail has been left. It didn't give you any more context. You just got a notification saying that there's a voicemail. But now in iOS 18, after the live voicemail ends, you'll notice that you have a new notification that shows up, and it looks very similar to a text message, but it shows the full transcript of what was said in that voicemail, or at least the first part of it. Now, here's a feature I've been waiting on for a very long time, and I think you guys have been waiting on this forever as well. Now with iOS 18, you can record phone calls, and those phone calls can be transcribed to reflect on later. So if I make a phone call to somebody, you'll notice that we have a new icon up in the top right-hand corner. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. So when you're in a phone call in iOS 18, you'll see this new glyph icon up in the top left that has some waveforms and a record button. Now, if you tap on that, that says this call will be recorded, and the audio prompt gets sent to the other person. So the person on the other line will be indicated that they are being recorded.
This call will be recorded.
Now you'll also see this new UI pop up right here that shows it's being recorded along with a stop button. So if I unmute and we can hear myself, this will transcribe everything that I'm saying or what's being heard on the other end. So it'll actually pick up both sides of the phone call. So you can hear yourself and you can hear the person on the other end of the phone. So if I hang up, take a look at what happens. It now shows view saved call. So that pops up and you can tap on that and it will take you straight into the notes application and you can see this call recording right here. So you can play it from there. You could also tap into here to see the full transcript, and you can even summarize that transcript. And if you go back into notes and go to your folders, there's a new folder here for call recordings. So if you go into here, you can see, everything that was being said in these different phone calls. So here's an example of a phone call I had with Tim Cook for 5 minutes. And from here, you can get a summary. So if you tap on summary, you can see a summary of that phone call. You could also search the transcript. So if you swipe up, you'll see a search button down here where you can search. And you have these 3 dots right here where you have additional options. And you could also search inside of the phone application for transcribed voicemails. There's a new UI for swapping calls. So if you have somebody on hold while you're on the other line, you get this new UI up top. And if you have 2 SIM cards set up on your device, you can go into the control center onto the toggle or just go to the cellular data toggle and haptic press, and you can switch between your 2 different lines. Apple also mentions a live caller ID lookup has come to iOS 18. So these are new APIs that allow developers like Truecaller to fetch information from their servers and provide live caller ID for incoming calls. In the FaceTime application, we have a big change to screen sharing. So if you're somebody who likes to help out your parents or your grandparents with troubleshooting on their iPhone, your life and their life is about to get a whole lot easier thanks to SharePlay remote control. So how this works is if the recipient shares their screen, this works for you as well, but in this instance, if the recipient shares their screen, you will now be able to write on and control that person's screen. So for example, we're going to go here and you can see that I have the other person's screen pulled up right here on this device. And now we have new options down in the bottom of this section. So we have the zoom, but down here in the bottom right, pay attention to this. If we tap on that, we now have remote control. So the other person will have to accept this. It does not work right away. And here's what that will look like on the other person's device. They do have to allow for you to be able to take control of their iPhone. So if you tap on allow, now on my device, I will be able to control the recipient's device. So for example, I can scroll over and you can see I'm controlling this person's phone. And on the other person's phone, it will say down here at the bottom that remote control is active, and you do have the option to stop it right there. So if your grandparents don't understand what you're saying on the phone, you can just remote into their device and control it from here. Now, Apple thought about this because you can see that certain sections will be blocked out. So sections like iCloud, changing passwords, paying for things, all of that is blocked out to protect maybe some older folks who, may fall for something and get scammed by somebody controlling their phone. So you can't do everything, but you can do the basics here, which I think is pretty cool if you want to remote in and control somebody's phone for troubleshooting purposes. Now, it gets even better because you can also draw on the other person's phone. So if you don't need to take full control, you can just draw on the phone. So we'll end the remote control here. So the other person is still sharing their screen with me. And from here, I can just simply draw on their phone. They will see that and it will disappear after a few seconds. So I'm not controlling their phone, I'm just simply drawing on it. So there are two different levels. If maybe the person doesn't trust you to remote into their device, you could just circle or point to things that they may be missing. Also, the video effects UI has been updated. It looks much better in iOS 18. So in iOS 17, we had these two big blocks above these platters in Control Center for video effects and mic mode. You would just haptic press on those, and that's how you could change everything right there for both. But now in iOS 18, it's combined with this top section for privacy. So before, it just showed those two random items for privacy. But now in iOS 18, everything is combined into this one section, and the UI for video effects and mic mode looks significantly better. And then also before in iOS 17, when you want to change the intensity, you had to tap on these three dots and change the depth. But now in iOS 18, it's this little drop down right here, and you have a new little UI for the depth along with a description of exactly what you're changing, and the same for studio light. Also for mic modes, you can see we now have this new animated UI right here, and we have not only standard voice isolation and wide spectrum, but now with iOS 18, we also have an option for automatic. So it will automatically determine which mode you should be in. Also in iOS 17, if you chose the low data mode option here under your cellular settings for the data mode, your FaceTime calls would reduce the quality in order to save data. But now in iOS 18, FaceTime will use more data for improved call quality, even when you're in low data mode, if the network speed is good enough to, handle it. And by the way, if you're enjoying this iOS 18 video so far, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Okay, so let's talk Apple Intelligence, because this is undoubtedly going to be a big deal in iOS 18 and future versions of iOS. So Apple Intelligence is only compatible with the iPhone 15 Pro or the iPhone 16s and later. Now this is coming, the first batch of Apple Intelligence features are coming in iOS 18.1. So I will be touching on those here, but I will touch on a lot more detail in my 18.1 What's New video, since it's not out at the time of recording this. So first off, as you can see, we do have the new Siri UI, which looks absolutely beautiful, especially if you have a dark background. The colors just really pop, and it goes all the way throughout the screen. There's also another way to access Siri. So you can double tap at the bottom now, and that will pull up this menu right here, and you can now type to Siri. So if I want to ask, so I'll just type in weather in San Fran, ? And it will give me the weather for that location. Now also Siri will have improved contextual understanding. So it's not quite Siri 2.0 yet, but the contextual awareness is a little bit better than what we had in Siri in previous versions. What's the weather in San Francisco? Show me some nearby restaurants to there. And there you go. You can see on iOS 17, it pulled up my local restaurants. Here in iOS 18, it pulled up restaurants that are actually in the area I just asked Siri about. So the contextual awareness is definitely better with iOS 18, and it will only improve even more once we get Siri 2.0 at a later date. And then also the ChatGPT integration is coming at a later date in a future update where you will be able to ask ChatGPT questions. But my personal favorite Apple Intelligence feature is summarized notifications. So what this does is it will summarize all notifications from a specific app. So you can see I have 10 notifications from one application here. So instead of having to tap in there and see every single notification, read through each of them, it will summarize it by default right here, telling me, what is actually included in those notifications. So we'll be able to read through the content and give you an understanding of what was being said. So you can see right here, it shows, certain stocks have moved above the 30-day moving average. This one for music shows me 2 new songs that are out without me having to go into here and see, all the specific details about it. It breaks it down down. It makes it much easier to read. And this also shows up in the messages application. So this doesn't only show up on the lock screen. You'll also see this inside of the messages and the mail application. So it will give me kind of a summary of what was being said in these different messages. Here's what some emails look like on the lock screen, but here's what they look like inside of the mail application with Apple Intelligence. So it gives us a preview right there. And we also have a priority inbox right here as well, which will, again, Apple Intelligence will read the content and determine if these are priority emails that need a direct response, and it will keep them up top until I respond. And here's another awesome feature that will help a lot of people and save a lot of people some time. So we now have a feature called cleanup. So if you have a photo where you have a subject and then you have some people in the background that you maybe want to remove, you can now remove them from the Photos application. So all you have to do is go into Edit, and you'll see a new option down here that's titled Cleanup. If you go there, it will kind of dissect the image real quick, and then it will highlight what objects it detects by default that you can erase. So you can zoom into there, and it shows that this person I might want to clean up or remove. So I can tap on them, and you can see, boom, they're gone. Now it doesn't do a perfect job, and you can also circle if it didn't do a good job and try to remove more of that person. So there we go. That's not bad. And again, if you are, not pixel peeping, if you actually like zoom out, you will not really be able to tell that it's not a perfect image there. So obviously this is not the best. I mean, it's really just going to use content aware fill. It's not a generative fill feature, so it's not going to fill in that area with what it thinks should be there. It's just going to fill it in with everything around it. So again, it's content fill, not generative fill, at least not yet. And here's probably a better example. So this lady peeking out in the background, I can tap on her, and there you go. You can see it did a much better job of that person. Now, another kind of hidden feature here is that you can circle a face and it will blur that face out. So that one just removed my hat. So let me find one of my face without glasses on. Okay, so here's a picture of myself, and if I circle my face, take a look at what happens. You can also blur faces now using the cleanup tool. And then we also have writing tools. So if you select text anywhere throughout your device, this does not have to be in messages. This can be in email. This can be in your notes, anywhere. If you select it, you will see that we have an Apple Intelligence button right there, or you could always go up here in this little section and go to writing tools, and it will pull up this little panel. So from here, we can proofread, we can rewrite, we can change the tone to friendly, professional, or concise. And you could also, if you have something long, you can summarize it, you can get the key points out of that, and you could also create a list or a table from that content. It's actually pretty neat. So if I go to rewrite, for example, it will attempt to rewrite that, and you can see it shows it there. If you don't like it, you can retry, and you can also revert back to the original. And speaking of the mail application, we also have a summarize option now. So you can summarize an email. If it's maybe like a newsletter or a more lengthy email, you can summarize that, and it will show you the text right there. And you could also share your feedback if it was good or bad. But my favorite feature in mail with Apple Intelligence is Smart Reply. So if I go to reply to this email, which asks me if I want the red or carbon fiber case and if it's okay to ship out now, if I go to reply here, take a look at this. Right away, we get this cool little animation down here that reads the message and understands that either red case ship now or carbon fiber case ship later. So if I just do carbon fiber case ship later, take a look at this. It will write the email for me. It even says, "Hi there, I'd like the carbon fiber case, but please hold off on shipping it for now." That's pretty close to what I'd actually say. So this is actually a lot better, in my opinion, than some of the other writing tools in iOS 18 with Apple Intelligence. So again, there's more to come, and I will touch on Apple Intelligence a lot more in my iOS 18.1 What's New video. We have multiple changes in the music application. So starting off with the tabs at the bottom, before it was browse, now in iOS 18, it's been renamed to new. And there are a couple of minor changes in here. So if you go down to the just updated section, that looks different. And a few of these other sections look a little bit different than they did in iOS 17. In the now playing section, if you go into the queue, we have multiple changes here. So right up top, you can see that we now have a different position for shuffle, repeat, and autoplay. So before they were over here, really small icons to the right, but now they're front and center and much easier to press. In iOS 17, it said playing next. Now it says continue playing, and also the font is bigger than it was before. We also have more space over here to the right before the queue begins. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom of the queue, we have this new little glyph here for 524 more songs, whereas before it did not show anything. Now, if you swipe down, you will get the history of what you've played previously. So it will show all the songs that I was playing previously. We also have the option to clear our queue history with one tap. We also have a fundamental change to the way that the queue works in iOS 18. So it now works much more similar to Spotify. So now when you add a song to the queue, it adds that song to the end of the previously queued songs. So for example, you can see that we're currently playing the tunes playlist. I just press shuffle on that. But if we go to a separate album or a separate playlist and we go to add a song to the queue, first off, you can see that we now no longer have play next and play last. It's play next and then play after tunes, for example. So just go to play next on both of these. And then if we add another song, it now says add to queue instead of play last. And when we do that, take a look at what happens in our queue. We now have a standalone queue and it does not get added to our existing queue or the existing playlist. And also both of those songs play back to back instead of when I press play last, it would just add it to the very bottom of this playlist, which was, a lot of songs deep since it was a playlist. So the queue is significantly better in iOS 18 and it works a lot more like Spotify, which I love. Now you'll also notice that we can now clear the queue. So there's now a clear all button for the queue with iOS 18. When you tap on that, you can press again to clear the entire queue. Also, the AirPlay platter has finally been revamped. So if you tap on AirPlay in the bottom, it now has a much better look, a more modern look. Also, the animation is different. Before, it was kind of janky. Now in iOS 18, it's more smooth. It's also a lighter shade. It's more rounded off than it was before, and it doesn't take up pretty much the entire screen anymore. And you'll also notice how it doesn't show every single device. It just says show more if there are more devices to show, which I like that much better. We also don't have these speakers and TV text anymore, and this line is thicker than it was previously. We had these little thin lines. Now it's a much thicker line. AirPlay now supports playing spatial audio when AirPlaying to a HomePod and also over CarPlay. The crossfade feature has also been improved with iOS 18, so it will now fade into the next song a little bit better. It will be a little bit smoother than what we saw with iOS 17. You can also now remove multiple songs from a playlist at once. So if you tap on the three dots up in the top right and go to edit, we now have a new UI for editing the playlist. So you can see before you could only remove songs on a one-by-one basis, but now with iOS 18, you can select multiple songs and remove them at the same time. And we also have a trash icon in the bottom left and a plus icon to add in the bottom right. We didn't have that before. And if you go into an album, it now shows the full song title instead of cutting it off. So you can see for track 2, Mamacita, it shows the full song with the features. Same with track 5, it cuts it off in iOS 17. It shows the full thing in iOS 18. And you can see for track 8, it does the same thing. So now the full title of the song shows up in iOS 18 on the album view. The text underneath of the artist is larger and more bold than it was in iOS 17, and also down here where it shows the release date and all the other information, that is also more bold than it was in iOS 17. Also, you can now scroll over on the featured on section to see everything that this artist was featured on, whereas before you'd have to go into this menu to see everything. If you go into the songs section before in iOS 17, the filters and the sort by options were combined, but now in iOS 18, they are separate. So you have your filter right there for all songs and favorites, and then you have the three dots here if you want to change the sorting view. And it also now says date added instead of recently added. So a minor word change there. And you'll also notice that when you're sorting by title, we now have the letter that separates the songs, whereas before it was kind of hard. You'd really have to pay attention to see when that letter changed. So from P to Q, you can see there's no gap in iOS 17, but in iOS 18, it makes it clear, and you can see the letterhead right there in the left along with an underline anytime it goes to a new letter. Oh, and also up here in the search bar, you can see it now just says search, whereas before it said find in songs. You can now share play outside of just being in the car. So if you AirPlay your music to a HomePod or anything else, you now have the share play option down in the bottom of the now playing view. And you can tap on the share play icon to bring up the QR code where somebody can scan that, or they can discover you nearby and they can control the queue as well, add songs into the queue and skip and everything like that. And you might have also noticed this little glyph icon right here. That is music haptics. So this is a really cool accessibility feature where the haptics on the phone will vibrate to the beat of the music. So this is great for accessibility users who are maybe deaf or hard of hearing. That way you can feel the music on your hand while you're holding it. So if you go into your settings and go to accessibility and then scroll down, and you'll see that we have a new option for music haptics. You want to turn this on if you want to try this out. And you'll notice that this works in Apple Music Classical as well. And what's neat about this is that you can control it from the lock screen as well. So you could tap right there to enable or disable music haptics. There is also a toggle for this in the control center. So if you go here and add a control and you just search for music haptics, you will see it pop up right here, so you can control it easily in the control center as well. In the podcast application, we have a few small changes and a few large changes. So first off, on the now playing screen, we have multiple small UI tweaks. So first off, where it shows the date above the title of the episode, it's now a little bit more opaque. And also we now have the full date, so it shows the year at the end. Also, underneath of the scrub bar, the font size for the timestamps is larger, and you'll also notice that over here on the right, where it shows the time remaining in the episode, we no longer have a minus to the left of that number. Also on the now playing screen, if you start scrubbing through the episode, you will see the timestamp right above where your finger is scrubbing. So you can get a lot more granular with how far you're advancing or going back in this podcast episode. And you can see that also the numbers to the left and right now light up white, whereas before they did not light up at all. They just stayed gray and the same size. So they also get larger. You can see there's kind of an animation there on the left and the right side in iOS 18. You'll also get the timestamp above when you tap on the quick controls to go back or forward in 15 or 30-second intervals in my case. And it also shows you how fast you're scrubbing through the episode. So you can see if you're going slow, if you're scrubbing slowly through a certain section, it will say underneath fine speed scrubbing. If you go a little bit faster, it will say quarter speed scrubbing. And if you scrub even faster, it will say half speed scrubbing. And if you go into a podcast episode that has chapters, you will now see the chapter name above where you are scrubbing. So here's what it looks like in iOS 18. We have breaks in the scrub bar, kind of like you see on YouTube with chapters. That now shows up here in iOS 18 along with the title of that chapter right above it, whereas before in iOS 17 we didn't have any of that. You'll also notice that the chapter name shows up in the now playing section on the lock screen or up in your notification center. So instead of just showing the whole episode title like in iOS 17, it will now show that specific chapter, and it will change based on which chapter you're in next. And if you go to the show notes of a podcast episode and they have timestamps, those are now clickable, and they will open up this little menu here where you can play or share from that specific timestamp. Whereas in iOS 17, these were just not clickable whatsoever. It also looks like the formatting of the show notes has been cleaned up a little bit. And if you tap on these three dots here in the now playing view and go to share episode, you'll notice that we have a new section up top here. So before in iOS 17, you could just share the podcast episode and that was that. But now with iOS 18, you can not only share the episode, but you get the option to share the episode from a specific point in time, similar to what you can do with YouTube videos. So if you tap on from start, this is where you get the option to share a link either just from the start, or if you want somebody to hear only a certain part of the podcast, you can share it from that specific point in time where you tapped on the share button or from where you are paused. In the search tab, we no longer have as much heading up top, so search isn't so far down from the top of the screen like it was in iOS 17. Also, we have our profile picture over here on the top right. That just takes you to this section about your account. And then more importantly, when you go to search for something, first off, you'll see that you have recently searched. So you now have recently searched queries. Also, the search in general is faster. Apple calls this instant search results with iOS 18. So if I start typing in ESPN, for example, you can see that it doesn't have to think for nearly as long as it did in iOS 17. And it didn't even show everything right away. We still have to search. It just gives us some recommended search results. So then when we press on that, and then we can eventually get to what we've already seen for a while here in iOS 18. So search is significantly enhanced in iOS 18. And you can see that even the results show up differently. It's more relevant, and you can see that they got rid of the whole purple top results shows episodes section. It's now just much more streamlined and simple. And you can also search within your library as well, not just all podcasts. And you'll even notice that a few of these relevant related search results stay atop. We also have some changes to the AirPods. So if you go into your AirPods settings, we have multiple changes right here. So first off, you'll notice that we have an adaptive audio section. And when you go in here, you can change the adaptive audio to have less noise or more noise. And then a little bit further down, we have a new section called head gestures. And this is pretty amazing. So this allows you to move your head up and down or side to side to accept or decline phone calls when your AirPods are in your ears. So this allows you to be completely hands-free when using AirPods. And this also works for notifications as well. If you want to reply or dismiss notifications, you can do that with an up and down or a side to side head gesture as well, and you can change these in here if you would like. And we also have personalized spatial audio with dynamic head tracking for gaming, and this works for the AirPods 3 and the AirPods Pro and AirPods Max. Apple did also just receive FDA approval for its hearing aid feature in AirPods Pro 2, and this is going to be a massive deal because this is the FDA's first authorization of over-the-counter hearing aid software. So this is coming to all AirPods Pro 2 as long as you're on iOS 18 and you have the latest AirPods update, which as of the time of 18.0 coming out, it is not currently released yet, but it will be out soon since it now has FDA approval. In the camera application, we now finally have the ability to play music while recording a video. So this is not on by default, but if you go into your settings and then go into camera, it's up top here in iOS 18. It's all the way down here in iOS 17. And then if we go into record sound, and you can see that before that did not show up here. So that was just under record stereo sound, and that was it. But now in iOS 18, we have this new option right here that says allow audio playback. And it says that this will not pause automatically when recording video. So this is great not only for playing music while you're recording a video, but it's also great because when you accidentally open the camera, your music will not stop. That was one of my biggest pet peeves before, but now if you accidentally open the camera while you're playing music, it will not pause automatically. And also in this section, you can now choose to record your video's sound in either stereo or mono mode. And on the iPhone 15 and later, you now get portrait lighting controls from the regular photo mode. So you don't have to be in portrait mode anymore to get these studio light effects or any of these effects for portrait shots now. You just have to be in the regular photo mode. We can also now adjust the flash by tapping and holding on the option up in the top left-hand corner, and we get the quick menu there to turn it on or off. Before, you had to go into here and go to flash down here. You had no option to long press on this option up top. Now here is a groundbreaking feature that even Android does not have. We can now pause video recordings while recording a video on our iPhone. So you can see the pause icon down there. You can pause it, you have a stop button, and you can see the flashing UI up here to indicate that you are paused along with the paused text. And then you can just resume by tapping right there again. And now you have no need to cut out certain parts of dead spots in your videos. And by the way, I was being sarcastic. I know that Android's had that forever. Now here's something really cool. So if I record a video in, let's just say 60 FPS, and I shoot this little video here in 60 FPS, everything is fine, but maybe I want to slow down a certain part of that video. Well, before you had to be in slow mode to be able to do that, or you just had to have a video editing software. Well, now if we go into that video and you go to the edit button right here, you'll see that we have a new glyph icon up in the top right corner that looks like a speedometer. So this will allow you to change the playback speed, aka you can change the frame rate. So we can knock this down to 50%, which of course takes 60 FPS down to 30 FPS. So if we choose that, we can now choose what part of the video we want to be in 30 FPS. And the UI here is very similar to the slow mode UI that you have, but again, you don't have to be in slow mode. That's the big benefit here. And you could do this, like if you shoot in 120 FPS, you can knock that down to 60 or knock that down to 30. It's really nice to have that control here now. Also in the camera application, if we swipe up and go to our timer, we have a couple of changes here. So first off, the font size appears to be slightly larger by a couple of points, and also the text is a little bit thicker as well. But the main difference here is that we now have a 5-second timer option, and we're not just limited to 3 and 10 seconds. Also, the timer icon to the far left appears to have a slightly darker background, and the white stands out a little bit more. It might even be a little bit brighter than what we had in iOS 17. Also, third-party applications can now offer spatial video recording support if you have a compatible device. Okay, so now let's go into the Photos application, and man, I'm sure that you were not expecting this. The Photos application has a complete revamp in iOS 18 that you're probably going to hate at first, but bear with me because I think you'll love it after I show you how customizable it is. So first off, the whole UI has been completely changed. So before we had a lot of white space, but now you can see that our photos take up the majority of the screen, which I love. Also before, we were able to swipe over and see different albums and everything like that. And we had the shared albums, people and pets, and all of this down here at the bottom. But now it's basically a one-page UI in iOS 18. And you can see that everything shows up right here. We have a lot of visuals, whereas before we really just had a lot of text. And also if you go all the way down here, it shows our media types, our utilities, and down here we can customize. And we'll get to that in a second, but there's a lot to uncover here. So let's talk about everything else first. So number one, before, if you went into the Recents tab, that's essentially what the main page of Photos is now. But there are multiple differences. So first off, you can see up in the top left, it now shows Photos along with the total amount of items in Photos underneath of it. And then to the right, before we had Select and those 3 dots up in the top right, but now we have our profile picture in the top right, and then we have a search bar to the left of the Select button. And if you tap on that, we get a completely new search UI. So before in iOS 17, we just had a standalone option over here to search. And when you went into that, it just showed this right here. And then you were able to search for whatever you wanted. And the results were not great. So for example, if I search for cat, you can see that we now have top results along with the full amount of results. And it even recognized one of my pets as a cat, and it shows it in a card up top. We also have see all as a button up here, whereas before it showed up down here as just text. But search gets much better in iOS 18 as well, because you can search for very specific queries like cat in chair, and it will show me all the instances where a cat is sitting in a chair. Whereas before in iOS 17, I searched for the same thing and we have no results, even though I have the same photo library on both phones. So you can see it's going to show me any time that a cat was in or around a chair. Pretty neat. You can also filter your search results by tapping on the up and down arrow right there, and you have the sorting options, you can filter, and you can also change the aspect photo grid, the ratio of the photo grid. And then the last thing I'll talk about with search is that it shows our recent queries right here, along with some AI generated queries that it thinks that you might want to look for. And then we also have our recently viewed, recently edited, and recently shared right up here as well. And you can clear those recent search queries if you would like to. And if we tap on our profile picture up in the top right, we have this new view right here that shows our profile picture and our name up top, along with our total photos and videos. We have any shared album invitations right here. We have for your shared library. We have all the photos that were shared with you, either via text or if somebody was nearby. We also have the library view options, and we just have a bunch of different options in here in this new section. And basically the equivalent to this was just tapping on the three dots up in the top right before, because that's where you could change the libraries and all of these other options. But now they have their own full menu in iOS 18. Now, if you swipe down on the photos view and go to view more photos in your library, you will see this new tab bar appear at the bottom that shows multiple options. So we have an X over here now and a filter option, but we also have years and months, whereas before we had years, months, and days. And also the UI looks different. So if we tap on months, for example, you can see that this view has changed. So it shows a little bit more detail and it shows a lot more in the frame from these months, and same with years. So years has a different background. It's not just a white background. And also these appear to be a little bit more rounded off on the edges. And if you tap on the filter button down here in the bottom left-hand corner, you can sort by recently added or by date captured. You can change which library you're looking at, so either personal, shared, or both. And then if we go to filter, you can filter by different options. So if you want to only show favorites that are videos, you can do that. So if you tap on favorites, this menu stays up, and then you can select videos as well. Whereas before in iOS 17, once you selected one item, you can see that menu disappeared and you had to go into this, filter option up in the top. And then from here, you had to select in this only show menu, whatever else you wanted to be added. And it would show how many results were there, but it wouldn't actually show them. Whereas now in iOS 18, this menu stays up and it shows everything in real time as you select or deselect these options. And if you go to view options from here, you can not only zoom in, zoom out, or change the aspect ratio for the grid, but you can also now hide screenshots. So if you're like me and you hoard a bunch of screenshots and you don't delete them as often as you should, and they just clutter up your photo library, you can now hide screenshots so you can see those more important photos that you're looking for. And there's also a new option for showing shared with you, whereas before that was not in here. Now, the reason we no longer have a days option right here in this menu is because with iOS 18, we now have this recent days album. So now when you go into this, it will show this kind of, grid view of all of your days, and it will break down and show you what photos were taken on that day. So if I go to Saturday, for example, it will show me everything that was taken on that Saturday. And you can even create a movie from that day, which is pretty neat. So if I tap on movie, it will create a movie with sound from that day. And then we also have a new album in iOS 18 called Trips. And this is really awesome and something that I wish we had a long time ago, because this will take all of your photos from a trip and put them into one album without you needing to do that manually. So if you go into the trips view right here, you can even break it down by the year. So if I only want to see 2024, I can go into Universal Orlando Resort, for example, and it will show me all of the photos that were taken or videos that were taken during this trip. And it will even show the days right here. So we could also filter this if we would like to. We could tap on this button to see a summary or just show all of the photos and videos taken. And we could also create a movie from that trip as well. And then if we scroll down even further, we have multiple changes. So media types now has this little arrow next to it, so you can go in to see all of the media types just like so. Also, the text is now black instead of blue. It's inside of this little gray box, and the text is much smaller and more compact. You can swipe over on this section to continue seeing other media types. Also, we have utilities right underneath of that. So down below in iOS 17, we just had these utilities right here, but now in iOS 18, we have more utility albums. So first off, you can see receipts. That is a new album. So if you go into that, it will show any of the receipts that you've taken and put them all into this utility album. And if we go over, we have more. So we have handwriting. So this will show any photos that have handwriting on them, not just handwriting from an Apple Pencil, but any handwriting. We have illustrations, and we also have recently edited. That's new. Recently shared. That's also new. Also recently viewed. So if you recently viewed a photo and then you lost it, we now have a recently viewed utility album. Also, if you go into your recently deleted or hidden albums, there are some changes here as well. So before, it would try to scan your Face ID right away, but now in iOS 18, you have to tap on View Album for it to trigger Face ID before you put your passcode in. Also, this section is different. So the Use Face ID to view this album is smaller. The text is smaller. Also, recently deleted up in the top left is larger, and we have an X to the right now, whereas before we just had a back to albums in the top left. In the recently deleted album, we have a change to the delete and recover options. So we have that oval gray background along with glyph icons to the left of the delete and recover text, and also that text is now more bold. Now, if you're not a big fan of how everything looks when you open up the Photos application, you can customize your experience. So now if you go down to the bottom, we have a customize and reorder option. When you tap on that, this allows you to not only reorder where everything shows up on your main page, but you can also hide sections. So you can see if I don't want to see, for example, trips, or if I don't want to see shared albums, I can simply unselect those. And now when I go back, they just simply will not show up. It really cleans up the Photos application and gets rid of all of those albums that used to always just be there in iOS 17, even though you did not want to see them when you went into the Photos application. And by the way, Wallpaper Suggestions is also a new album in iOS 18, and this will show you, what a photo would look like on your lock screen if you set it as a wallpaper. So this is pretty neat and it works pretty well. And the changes continue when you go into an individual photo. So before in iOS 17, it would show the date and the time and the location in the top middle and that small little text. Now it's more prominent in iOS 18 and it's up in the top left, and the location is bold. To the right of that, we now have the 3 dots and an X, whereas before we had the edit button up in the top right. That edit button has now been moved down here to the bottom, and it looks like that now. So we'll get to that in a moment. You'll also notice a change to the shared albums icon right here. Down at the bottom, we have some changes. So we now have a light gray circle behind the share option and the trash icon. They're also more inset inside of the application. They're not, near the edge of the screen like they were in iOS 17. Also in the middle, we now have these 3 buttons combined. So we have the favorite button, we have info, and we have the new edit option. So again, edit used to be up in the top right. Now, when you want to edit, you just tap on this and you get a new UI here as well. So if we go to edit in iOS 17, here's what it looked like. And the first thing you'll notice is that we have a light view, but you can change that. If you tap on the 3 dots up in the top right, we have a new appearance option where we can change the appearance to show as system, dark, or light. So if I change that to dark, it will look more similar to what we saw in iOS 17. And by the way, here's what the options menu looked like in iOS 17 when you tapped on those 3 dots, and now it's a popped out, more modern looking menu. And down here, you'll notice that the background of the magic wand looks different. Also, the tip of the magic wand used to be filled. Now in iOS 18, that's flipped. So the bottom part of the wand is filled, the top is not. And once you make edits to a photo, if you tap on the 3 dots up in the top right hand corner, you can see the big difference in what shows up here. So before, basically the only option we had in iOS 17 was to copy the edits or paste the edits. That was it. Even if you go to add actions, that's all that showed there. But now in iOS 18, we have multiple options. So we can undo the auto enhance that we just did. So you can undo and redo different effects. We can now choose exactly exactly what we want to copy over. So in this instance, it only shows adjust, but if you made multiple edits, you can only copy certain edits before pasting them. And if you go into a video, we now have a new video player. So before in iOS 17, we just had this view right here where it would show the video player at the bottom, and it was kind of just built into this bottom bar. But now with iOS 18, we have that native video player look like we see in Safari and on our Mac. So we can go back and forth here, and you can see that we have the timestamps on the left and the right there. And you'll also notice a change because the video will now loop. So before in iOS 17, when a video ended, it would just end. It would just stay there and you would have to press play again. But now in iOS 18, the videos auto loop. And you could also control the volume easier as well because it's over here to the right of the play and pause on the menu bar. And you'll also notice that the whole video fits in frame in iOS 18, whereas in iOS 17, to see everything, I would have to tap to just see the full view. Otherwise, these menu options up top and bottom would cover it up. And that goes for photos as well. So if you have a photo that's really tall, like the aspect ratio is tall on that photo, like this photo, for example, you can see that in iOS 18, it will show me that full screenshot without anything obstructed. Whereas in iOS 17, if I wanted to see, the top up here where it says software update, for example, I would have to tap and hide that. And now I can see everything in that screenshot. So in iOS 18, it makes viewing full images easier from this little preview window right here. Also in iOS 18, there's a new prompt when you go to add a photo to an album, and it will prompt you to add that photo to the last album that you added a photo from your main library to. So the last photo I added to an album was in the wallpapers album. So now when I tap the share sheet and go to add a photo to an album, it will prompt me to add a photo to the last album that I selected. And if you swipe up on a photo, it will now show you what albums that specific photo is included in. So this is included in wallpapers. I can tap on that and it will take me into the wallpapers album. And if you have a photo that was sent to you by somebody in messages, it will now show a new interface along with their profile picture down here at the bottom. And when you tap on that, it will take you into that specific messages thread. We also have a change to the album. So if you haptic press on any album, you'll see that we have additional options here. So before you could only rename the album from here, but now in iOS 18, you can edit title and photos. So that name has been changed, and you could also edit the photos from in here. So before you had to go into the actual album and then go up here to edit or go to select, and then you had to choose whether you wanted to delete or add different photos. But now you can edit the key photo up here, and you could also tap right here to add additional photos to this album. And if you go to add an album to a folder, there's a new UI. So before it was just this plus right up here in the top left. Now it says add. And if you select new album, you can see that this UI has also been changed. So before you had to enter a name for the album and that was it. But now once again, you can change the name of the album and also add, the photos for the album right in the same interface. And you can also now add or remove existing albums in folder. So if you haptic press on the album inside of this folder, you can remove from folder. Before, you only had the option to delete the entire album. If you switched your browser from Safari to something else, you might be coming back with iOS 18 because Safari gets some pretty incredible changes with iOS 18. First off, we have a feature called distraction control, or what I like to call the Thanos snap feature. So what this does is it allows you to hide distracting or annoying elements in Safari. Think of it like an ad blocker, but for elements on a web page and not ads. So for example, there's nothing I hate more than these full screen pop-ups that you cannot get out of unless you tap on, something on that pop-up. So I want to get rid of that every single time I visit this web page. So to do that, we're going to tap on this icon to the left of the address bar, and you'll see that we have a new option that says hide distracting items. Now, when we tap on that, we get prompted to select an item. So we're going to select this, and now we can just go ahead and tap hide, and now we will no longer see that again. Now, same with this little let's chat button down there. I do not like how websites have this little chat icon, so we can tap on that and tap on hide, and we get that Thanos snap animation, and it's gone for good unless something changes. And so if we go ahead and refresh, you can see that we no longer see that pop-up down there, and we do not get that full screen ad. And here's another example. We have the cookie banners that pop up, and nobody likes seeing those cookie banners every time they go on a website. So we can just go to that and double tap again, and we will hide that item. Now, same with this little hand right here. We'll double tap that and it will go away. Same with this question mark. We'll double tap that and it goes away. And you can see that anytime I refresh the page, or if I go to this web page in the future, those elements that I hid will remain hidden, and you'll see this little blue eye in the bottom. And if you tap on that, this will allow you to show the hidden items again. So if you want to revert those settings, you can do that. And you could also report a distraction control issue. Now, the key thing to keep in mind here is that the elements will only stay hidden if the content stays the same. If the content changes dynamically, like every time the web page reloads, like ads, for example, you will have to re-hide that element every time you reload or every time you go to a new page on that website. So again, elements like cookie banners, Google sign-in pop-ups, newsletter sign-up forms, things like that typically do not change, so they will remain hidden during future visits. But for display ads from Google, for example, those change on every refresh, so they will not remain hidden and they will not persist after a refresh. We also have a new highlights feature in iOS 18. So you can see before on the bottom left, we had these two A's, but now we have this icon right here to replace those two A's. And if you see these purple sparkles, that means that a summary highlight is available. So if you tap on that, you will now get an AI generated summary of that web page. And if you tap on show reader, it will show this section up top where it has summary. And if you tap into that, it will show you a short summary of that article. And summarizing articles doesn't always work on every website, but where this is really useful is for finding directions, hours, menus, and phone numbers on websites such as hotel websites, restaurant websites, you name it. So for example, I have a hotel website pulled up here, and you can see we have the purple sparkles. Now on iOS 17, if you wanted to find the address or the phone number for this place, we'd probably have to scroll down. I'm still not seeing it, Okay, there we go, down at the bottom, or you might have to go in the menu. Well, now in iOS 18, if you tap on this icon, it will show you the address along with a map. It will show the hours if they're available, along with a phone number up here if available as well. So I find the highlights feature to be much more useful in instances like this. And this whole menu has just been improved in iOS 18. Like you can see that we have this play all animations option. We have the manage extensions down at the bottom now, whereas before it was up top. We have the option to translate to Spanish now. That's new. Also, the find on page is down here in the bottom left-hand corner, whereas before in iOS 18, that was in the share sheet. So you had to go to share, and then it was down here, find on page. So it's now much easier to access that from this menu. Also, when you want to change the text size, that now pops up like this, whereas before it was just like this. We had the percentage in the middle, but now the percentage only shows up after you change it bigger or smaller. It doesn't show the whole time, and it's also a much better animation now. And of course, we have these three dots down here in the bottom right where we have a full page menu where we can change up our different tab actions. We can edit these as well. So if you want to change the order or add something to the favorites, that's all right here now in this section. We have a new look for the tab view. So if you go into some tabs, you can see that we now have a more flat look. Before we had these kind of bubbles here to indicate what tab groups that we were in, but now it's more built in to this bottom menu. It's also disconnected from this bottom section, so it now has a line instead of all being connected beforehand. The personal tab group used to have a personal glyph icon down there, but now that does not show up. It just shows the three lines. Also, when you go to the top of a tab group, it now shows the title of it up in the top left-hand corner, along with a share button. When you haptic press on the amount of tabs that are open, you now get more options. So you can manage tab groups. You can arrange tabs by either the website or the title. You can copy the links, or you can add bookmarks for all 9 tabs. Before, you could only just copy links. That was it in iOS 17. You can also easily create a new tab group by swiping swiping over to the left. So before, if you did that, nothing would happen. But now if we swipe left, you can see we can use that gesture to create a new tab group. And we also have a new UI here when you add a new tab group, and we get the option to name it right there along with the trash icon in the top right. When you haptic press on one of the tabs that you have open, we now have a new option for move tab. Before it just said move to tab group. So now you get that option, and you can see a slight difference here as well because new tab group is at the bottom, whereas before it was up top. And if you go over to private browsing, we have a new glyph icon up here, and it also now says private browsing instead of private browsing mode. And also you can see a difference in the font color and the font sizing. iOS 18 introduces a brand new application called Passwords. And this is very simple, and it's not completely new because this application essentially lived within the settings passwords section. But now we have our own standalone application. And if you go into here, you will see a nice new interface. So we have all passwords. We also have pass keys. We have our codes, Wi-Fi passwords, security, and deleted. We also have our shared groups down here. So if you share password groups with others, those will all show down here. You can also search for passwords. And you also have a plus icon in the bottom right-hand corner where you can instantly add a website, app, or label right there and insert a username. And it will also recommend you a password, and you get the option to add to a group and add notes instantly. If you go into one of the passwords, it shows the website right here underneath of password, whereas before it was all the way down here for some reason. Also, the security now shows up like this. So we get a glyph icon and it says strong password. And you also get the option to set up a verification code, whereas before set up verification code was underneath of account options and it didn't tell you if the password was strong or not. Also, if you tap on the website, before you only got the option to copy website. Now you get the option to open website, copy website, or edit websites. So you can also add a website for a password. So this is another nice new feature. If you have the same username and password, you can add a additional website where that username and password will pop up. I think this is more so for adding additional variations of a URL, like maybe gmail.com and mail.google.com. So that's just an example. If you have multiple variations of a website, you can add them all to one password. Also, when you enter in a username and a password and then you try to go to a different web page or refresh, before you would get a pop-up that looked like this. It would say save password, never for this website or not now. It would pop up from the bottom, but now we have a new pop-up UI in iOS 18. It does the same thing, just a different look. And also the wording is a little bit different as well. And if you go into your settings and go to autofill and passwords, you now have the option to autofill from the passwords app instead of Google, but you can switch that right there as well. And we also have a new default for setup codes. So you can set that to be in passwords if it's not already there by default. And then of course, if you go into your settings, you will have a settings menu for the passwords application where you can disable and enable certain settings like detecting compromised passwords, suggest strong passwords, and allow automatic passkey upgrades. Now, a pretty cool feature in passwords is that you can create a QR code with your Wi-Fi password. So if you go into the Wi-Fi section and then go into one of your Wi-Fi networks, you can see that we have the option to show network QR code. So now when you tap on that, it will automatically generate a QR code so that others can scan it and get the password for that Wi-Fi network. And one last little tidbit I wanted to mention is that if you created an account with the sign in with Apple on a website, that can now be shared through password groups. So you can now add those passwords if you sign in with Apple into groups. You can change the sorting order of your passwords by tapping on these two arrows right here. You could also see the date edited, the date created, all of that. So if I go to date created, for example, it allows me to, see the this week, previous 30 days, 2024, and so on. You'll also get a new UI when you go to autofill your password on a website. So this is the new look here. And the new WebKit update for Safari 18 adds support for using passkeys across related origins. So this lets websites use the same passkey access across a limited number of domains which share a credential backend. And by the way, you could also access the passwords application on Windows via the iCloud Passwords app. You can also now see every website you used the sign in with Apple service. So if you go to your settings and go to your Apple account up top, there's a new section here that says sign in with Apple. And from here, you'll be able to see every account that was created using this service. And when you go in there, it will show the Apple account and the email that was used. So if you need to reference the hide my email address that you used, you can now see that right here. And you could also copy it from here as well if you haptic press on it. We have some changes in the Files application. So number one, we now have a awesome new feature that allows you to keep a file downloaded inside of the Files application. That way you don't need to re-download it in the future and you don't have to worry about it getting auto-deleted on accident. So if you haptic press, we now have that new option for keep downloaded. And you'll know when a file is permanently saved to your Files app when it has that glyph icon to the right of the file name. Also, when you haptic press on a file, we now have quick actions for copy, move, and share. So now these are much easier to access and it makes maneuvering around the Files app so much quicker. Whereas before, you'd have to go all the way down here and they were all just three separates, in a vertical view, but now they're up top in a horizontal view and it makes life much easier. And you'll also notice a change in the order of pretty much everything on this menu. And then for quick actions, we now have a settings gear glyph icon instead of this little magic wand like we had before. MP3 files now show the album artwork in Files. If you tap on the three dots up in the top right hand corner, before under view options used to have this little drop down that would show group by and show all extensions, but now there's no drop down, but we have our own menu here. So you can now sort by, group by, change the icon in list style, and you also have the ability to show or hide file name extensions. And then also in the Files app, you can now format external drives. So this is great, especially for iPad users on iPadOS 18. The calendar application gets perhaps the biggest change ever with iOS 18. And this change is apparent immediately after you open up the application. So first off, on the month view, we can see that August now shows up big in the top left, whereas before it just showed an abbreviation and it was a small red text right here. We also have three different views. So before in iOS 17, if you tapped right here, you just got the option to see like your events for the day and that was it. But now in iOS 18, that same section up there is smaller. And when you tap on that, you get the option to change between a compact view, a stacked view, a details view, and also a list view. So if you tap on list, that's what we saw before on iOS 17. It just looks a little bit different. But now if we go back to compact, you can see how stacked looks. So it gets a little bit bigger. And then you can also tap on details to see the details of what's in your calendar. Now you can also change the UI by simply pinching. So this is very intuitive and you also get haptic feedback to go along with it. So you can pinch in and pinch out depending on how big or how small you want your month view in the calendar to look. And here's the full amount that you can zoom in. So you basically get a big week view when you zoom in this much. And then here's what it looks like when you zoom all the way out. And in iOS 17, if you had an event, you just had to tap on the day to be able to see that event. That was it. You couldn't see it any other way. But now with iOS 18, if you want to see, what that event is, number one, it's now color coordinated instead of just being all gray, but also you can kind of just zoom in and get a quick glance of what's due that day or what you have coming up that day, and then zoom back out if you would like to. You don't have to necessarily tap on it. But even if you do tap into it, you'll notice some differences here as well. So first off, you can see the date looks different underneath of the week view. So it shows the day and there's a slash between Monday and the date right there. It's also more bold. Also down here, you can see on the left-hand side, all of the times look different. So the font is bigger, so the number stands out more, and the AM or PM is over to the right a little bit further. And then also for the actual event for that day, it shows the time underneath of it, whereas before you only saw the time from looking over on the left-hand side. When you go to create a new event in the calendar, it now just says new instead of new event. And that's because now with iOS 18, the calendar application is fully integrated with the reminders application. So from the calendar, you can either create an event or you can create a reminder and you can set the date of it right here. You can even add it to a specific list that you have set in the Reminders app. And if you go to details, you can even change all of these other options as well. So you could add a location, you can add tags, you could add the priority, you can add an image. You can do all that without even going into the Reminders application. And the best part about the Reminders integration is that you could actually complete the reminder straight from Calendar as well. You don't need to go into Reminders for that. If you tap on the Calendars option down in the bottom middle, iCloud and other, the text right here, the headers are larger and more bold than they were previously. Also before in iOS 17, it just said hide all, but now we have a little drop down and an animation instead. Before we had show declined events and we had this little circle that we could check and uncheck, but now we have a kill switch for that, along with the option to show completed reminders. And if you tap on the eye on one of your iCloud calendars or any of your calendars under shared with, we now have a new glyph icon to the left of add person. And also that text is a little bit bigger. By the way, if you find this video useful, be sure to subscribe. These type of videos are my specialty and you'll stay in the know about all of the new iPhone features before all of your friends. Okay, so now let's talk about the standalone Reminders application, because yes, we have the full integration where we can create, edit, and complete reminders in the Calendar app, but we also have changes in the Reminders app itself. So if you go into a smart list and you have a task with subtasks, you can see that they now show up as blue, and you can tap on that to see the subtasks within that task, whereas before you could not do that. There's also now a recently deleted folder in the Reminders application, and if you go into here, you can see all of your recently deleted reminders from the past 30 days. And if you want to bring one of them back, you just simply tap on it and you can recover that reminder. You can also now edit reminder requests right after asking Siri. So for example, remind me today to do the dishes. Actually make that tomorrow at 12. There we go. Whereas before in iOS 17, remind me today to do the dishes. Actually remind me tomorrow at 12. And you can see it does not understand what I'm saying. Also, the UI looks different when you ask Siri to add a reminder. Remind me tomorrow to eat good food. You can see that the UI looks way better here in iOS 18 compared to iOS 17 when asking via Siri. And if you go into the reminders settings, you'll see multiple differences in here. So first off, the whole header is new. So it now gives us a description along with an image. Reminders accounts is what it is now, whereas before it was just accounts. The allow reminders to access is now at the top. And if we go down to the bottom, we also have a new section for grocery categorization. So you can now add an additional language to automatically place grocery items into categories. We also have multiple new shortcut actions here and reminders. So this whole other section is new. And then also the open smart list. You can open a specific smart list. And here's what that looks like when you add it to your shortcuts. The Notes application gets some major changes with iOS 18. And some of these I've been waiting on forever. So the first one is the ability to record audio notes and also transcribe that audio. So if you go to the paperclip icon, you'll see that we have a brand new option for record audio. If you tap on that, it will bring up a very voice memos like UI, and you will see this little playhead right here, and also this little annotation glyph, which indicates that you have transcription turned on. So there's no transcript right now, so we are going to just go ahead and press record, and it will start recording what I'm saying. And since I have the transcript button pressed, it will start transcribing everything that I am saying, but you can turn that off and you will see the waveforms right there as well. You also have these three dots where you can rename while editing, or while recording, I should say, if you would like to. Now, you do not have to stay on this screen either. You can go out of here, you can start typing something else, you can lock your device so you can continue recording. As you can see right here, I am still recording while I'm on the lock screen. So this is great if you maybe go for walks and you want to put your phone in your pocket or in your waistband while you're talking on your AirPods to record a note, an audio note. You can go ahead and do that while the device is locked. So once you're done recording, you can just go into here. You could also pause from this section if you would like to, but we're going to go into here and we will pause. And from here, you can go ahead and tap on done. And you can see we get this new card now inside of the Notes application that is, pretty rich. So it shows the dates, it shows the length of time, there's a play button, and also a short snippet of the transcript. And when you tap on that, it will show you the entire transcript right here, you can even search within the transcript. And also now when you press on the three dots in the top right, you get the option to add the transcript to the note. So we'll add everything into the note right there. And you can see that the player is now this floating bar, which is really nice. Okay, so now that we have some text in this note, I want to show you some additional features here. So we can now highlight the text different colors. So if you go into the formatting menu, you'll notice a couple of changes in here. So we now have the new highlight button down in the bottom right-hand corner here. So you can choose your color. So choose whatever color you would like to highlight. So we'll just stick with purple for now. And you can see that you press this button to highlight the text. So if I want to highlight that, let's just say we want to highlight menu options as well. And there we go. Those are highlighted and they stand out a lot more. And you can see I tried to treat the transcript and menu options as kind of headers for the text that came after it. And before in iOS 17, that's really all you could do. But now in iOS 18, you can take that a step further and make it more like Notion, for example, because we have collapsible headers. So all you have to do is just select the text and then change the format to heading, and you will see that we have a little down arrow to the left of that appears. And when you press on that, you will see the text under it collapses. So let's go ahead and press on that again. And now if we want to make menu options its own separate heading, we could just simply make that a heading option as well. And now you'll notice that not everything gets collapsed when I press the transcript down arrow. So if we press that, you can see it's kind of hard to press sometimes. There we go. And menu options is right there as well. So this works a lot better on the Mac because you can click on it and you have much easier access to press on those arrows, but that is how it works now with iOS 18. It's much better and it really feels a lot more like a professional note-taking application, maybe like a Notion or Obsidian or some of the other great note-taking apps out there. And if you have an iPad, there's now refined handwriting. So this makes your text more legible when handwriting, especially with an Apple Pencil. This is very useful. Now also in Notes, we do have the Math Notes feature, which I will talk about this more in depth in the calculator section, but you should know that you now have a folder over here for Math Notes. And just for the basics of Math Notes, I will show you how this works. You could just put in a math problem like so, and it will give you the solution pretty much right away as you're still typing, out the problem here. So it will show you the results in real time, which is pretty awesome. You can also do this with your own handwriting with an Apple Pencil. The PDF inline search has been improved, so you can now search PDFs and document scans better with iOS 18. Also, the settings for Notes looks a lot better with the graphic up top, along with the header, the description, and Notes accounts is up at the top now versus being under the Allow section before. By the way, this video is sponsored by me and my new wallpaper collection, Volant, which I think you will love. It's a big collection of both light and dark themed wallpapers that go perfectly with light icons, dark icons, or tinted icons in iOS 18. It was actually built with iOS 18 in mind, so it's carefully crafted for this update. And of course, we do have some color matching colors for the iPhone 16 as well. So if you got an iPhone 16, that's just a double bonus for this wallpaper collection. So check it out. It is linked down in the description below, and use code SPECIAL. I'll just make that up on the spot. Use code SPECIAL for 25% off of this wallpaper collection. I think you will love it. Send me some screenshots of your home screen on X or Instagram. Now we also have iPhone mirroring, which does require macOS Sequoia as well. So if you have a Mac and an iPhone running the latest software, you will be able to mirror your iPhone to your Mac. This allows you to control your iPhone from your Mac, including typing on there and just using the mouse to navigate through your iPhone on your computer. And you could also see your notifications on your Mac now without ever needing to pick up your iPhone. We have some changes in the voice memos application. When you go to start recording a voice memo and you go ahead and stop it, you'll see some changes here. So the UI for the actual player looks different. So number one, you can see that the recording appears below the player, whereas before it appeared above the player. We also now have a waveform glyph icon versus before where we just had these little switches for the options. And if you go into there, you'll see some differences as well. So we have a whole new menu here, whereas before that was not the case. We just had these little options right there, and that was it. Even if you tapped on the three dots, you didn't really get any options. But now in iOS 18, again, it's very similar to what we saw in the Notes application. again, but we have multiple options. So up here in the top right-hand corner, if you press on that, that gives you easy access to trim this voice note. And you can see you can trim it, you can delete, you could also preview the trim right there. We also have voice memos transcriptions now. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the little annotation icon. If you tap on that, that allows you to see the transcriptions, but it gets even better because if you select something right here, you can see that you can replace it as well. So if you select that and then just tap on replace, it will erase that sentence and you can say what you meant to say. And then if you go ahead and press on that and then press on done, you now have the option to either save or save as. So you can now save this as a new recording as well. So we'll go ahead and press that. And now the original was there, it stays there, but we now just created a new document or a new voice memo. And by the way, you could also now record your voice memos in stereo. So if you go into your voice memos settings, we now have the option for stereo recording. It's not just limited to mono. If you have an iCloud Mail account, if you use your own domain on iCloud, there's new cleanup tools. There's also the ability to manage old emails via time-based rules. So for example, you can remove emails that are no longer needed to save storage. So if you had like an old unopened newsletter from over a year ago, it will auto delete that if you set it up. And there's also unsubscribe and delete. So this will send future emails from those senders to the trash automatically. iOS 18 also brings a bilingual keyboard to iOS for the first time. So now inside of our keyboard, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, it says EN and ES. And that means that I have Spanish and I also have English as my keyboard. So that means if I were to type something in English, you can see that nothing gets corrected. Now, if I switch to Spanish, you can see that it will auto-complete what I meant to say, and it will not treat it as if it were wrong. And it will even give me predictions for what I want to say next in that other language while I'm still typing in English as well. So I can interchange how I type. So if you want to set this up, just go into your settings, go to General, and then go down to Keyboard, and then go to Keyboards up in the very top. And from here, go to your primary language keyboard. So for me, that's English US. I'm going to go into that. And from here, you'll see under languages, we now have an option to add language. Before in iOS 17, you had the same option, but when you went into your language, you just had the option to choose the keyboard layout, and that was it. But now with iOS 18, once again, we can have a bilingual keyboard. So we'll go into add language, and from here, we can choose whatever language we would like to, anything that is supported. So Spanish, for example, I can go ahead and set that, and now it shows that it will be added to the multilingual keyboard, and that's what we saw here in messages. Also, the quick path feature, which is where you swipe to type, that now supports more languages. And if you don't like seeing the math results here in the keyboard, you could also turn that off here as well. So this is under the all keyboard section, and then just turn off show math results. We also have some changes in the weather application. So first off, the top font is less opaque than it was on iOS 17, especially the current condition down here. So where it says cloudy right now, that's just a lot less opaque. It's kind of more transparent than it was in iOS 17. Also, the font in general looks a little bit skinnier by maybe a point. And you can see the high and the low also look a tad bit different here. And if you tap on the conditions, either in the 10-day forecast or just the hourly up here, just to pull up this graph here, you will notice some differences as well. So first off, underneath of this section right here, we now have the actual and feels like temperatures. So before, that was not a toggle. And you'll see when you tap on this icon right here as well, it shows under conditions that we have temperature and feels like now. And the main difference here that you'll notice is that feels like is just no longer its own separate section. It's combined in with temperature, and that's what makes the conditions module now. That's what makes the conditions graph. So if we keep going down, there are some additional changes as well. So under chance of precipitation, it now shows today's chance along with a percentage. It never said that before. The graph looks a little bit different here in iOS 18. Also, we don't have that percentage up top. And underneath of the line, it's a little bit less opaque than it was before. It now says the daily chance of precipitation tends to be higher than the chance for each hour. It didn't say that before. And if we scroll down past the precipitation graph, we now have some changes here as well. So UV index is no longer the first box that appears. It's now the feels like, the conditions menu. We have some changes to the wind section. So before we had a big font for the number, the miles per hour for wind and for gusts, but now in iOS 18, it shows wind, gusts, and directions, and it's a lot smaller and less opaque. Those numbers don't stand out as much, which I like. It also shows the direction now right here as a number, whereas before it just had a compass pointing in a direction and nobody really knew, what that direction was. So it shows that now, and now the little compass shows the miles per hour instead of just saying it's east. And you'll also notice more pronounced detail in the compass, especially the little notches that go around it, and it's also a little bit smaller than it was in iOS 17. You can also now have it set to show your home and work locations by default. So you can see that we have these two new glyph icons that show if it's home or work. And if you go into your settings, you can turn this on or off as well. So if you go into the weather settings, under locations, we have a home and work section, and it uses the addresses from the contacts. Now, the calculator application gets a massive update with iOS 18, and you can see some small changes right away in terms of the UI, but there are also fundamental changes to the calculator with this update. So starting with the UI changes, you can see that we have a difference in color right away. So before we used to have a light gray color up here, now it's a darker shade of gray, and you can see that the font size is also different. So the numbers are slightly larger than they were with iOS 17. And the font is also thinner on the buttons than what we had in iOS 17. Meanwhile, when we type in up top right here, the font is thicker. It's also smaller and more bold. And here's where you'll start to see some additional differences. So before, we just had a clear button. If we wanted to backspace and correct something, we had to swipe our finger over, which was kind of hidden, and a lot of people didn't even know you could do that. But now in iOS 18, we have a proper backspace. So now we can backspace on our buttons. And if we were to make this into a problem, if we type in +3, you can see that before in iOS 17, it would make the first number disappear. So we cannot see that it's 99 plus 3. We just see what we typed in last. But now in iOS 18, we can see the full expression. Like if I keep going, for example, we could do that again, and you could see the difference there. And if we press on equals, we could see another big difference, because now in iOS 18, it shows us the original expression, the original problem, and then the answer. And it's even better than that, because you could also tap on the original expression and change it, or if you want to add on to that, you can. And the equals button is also final now. So if you press on equals after you get the solution, nothing happens. Whereas before in iOS 17, you could keep the solution going. You could keep adding on to that solution by pressing the equals button. And by the way, if you want to clear this faster than just pressing on backspace multiple times, you could just press and hold that and it will clear all. And you're also no longer limited on space. So on iOS 17, you were limited to just 9 digits when in portrait mode. And if you went into landscape mode, you could add more, but you still had a limit, and you can see that right there. But in iOS 18, the limit is infinite, because you can see you can now scroll on this page right here, and you can put in as many numbers seemingly as you would like. I've not been able to find a limit to this. Now, also up in the top left, you'll see that we have these 3 lines with dots. If you press on that, that will give you the history. So now with iOS 18, you have a calculation history section, and you could go into here. You can even see the previous 30 days. So it goes back quite a ways, and we can tap on one of these and it will put that right back into our calculator here. You could also tap and press, or press and hold on one of these, and you can copy the expression or copy the result or delete it from your history. And there's also an edit button up here as well, where you can delete all, or you can just select what you would like to delete. And you probably already noticed this, but instead of the long 0 at the bottom like in iOS 17, we now have a new calculator button down here in the bottom left. And when you tap on that, that gives you the ability to change modes. So we can now go into scientific mode. So before in iOS 17, you could only get into the scientific calculator if you put the device in landscape mode. And if you put iOS 18 in landscape mode, we also have a few changes here. So the typical UI changes over on the right, but we also have a new position for the degrees and radians. So if you press on that, it will switch between degrees and radians. It's just in a new position. It was all the way over here in the bottom left in iOS 17. Now also in iOS 18, it will give you a little notification up here if you are in radians or degrees. So when you tap on that, it will show radians. If you're in degrees, it doesn't show it, but it just shows rad up there if you are in radian mode. But there's a lot more to it, because if we go to our calculator here, we also have a conversion calculator. So I'm going to get out of scientific mode so you can see you can also combine the modes here. So you can be in scientific mode and also in conversion mode at the same time. So we're going to go back to the basic calendar just so I can show you how this works. So we now have conversions built into the calculator, and it's not just for money or simple things like that, which, by the way, you can see how quick it reacts to everything. Everything is instant when you do these conversions, and that's really going to be the benefit of using this over something like you can find on Google or another application. There's no loading, nothing. Everything happens on device and very, very quickly. So anyways, if you want to change this, just go and tap on these dots right here, and you will see that you can convert pretty much anything that you can imagine. Anything that you're thinking about, you can convert it here. It's pretty wild how they've thought of everything to put in here. I mean, we're talking time, weight, volume, temperature, speed, length, fuel, power, force, pretty much everything. Like I said, you can go ahead and convert in here. So highly useful. But the biggest change in the calculator is going to be math notes. And this is a feature that allows you to basically write out math problems and it will answer it for you instantly. So if I go ahead and type out whatever I want times whatever I want, so you can see that the equals pops up right there. And we also have in our predictive text here, different things that we can enter. So if we only want to enter in the solution, we could just go ahead and tap on that. And there you go. It only inserts the solution. Now you might be wondering, why would I do that if I have a built-in calculator where I could just type in the numbers? Well, the reason being is because it's not just meant for simple problems like that. Like this is best used for things like graphs as well. So if you want to put y equals 5x plus 7, for example, you can see that a little pop-up will show up here saying insert graph. And when you tap on that, it will do the graph for you just based off of what you typed in. And you can also reference variables. So for example, I wrote out a grocery list with the price of each item, and each one of these are going to be considered a variable as long as I type them in at the bottom of this. So if I go ahead and type in, let's just say yogurt plus, and you can see it's already giving me, the price of that right there. It's referencing it. And it also has this little animation where it turns orange. Rice. So you can see it's starting to highlight rice right there as well. So you're referencing that variable. We can do coffee. It will reference that. And then we can let's just do one more. And there we go. And now we have the solution to that problem by referencing those different variables from my grocery list. So pretty awesome. And this gets a lot more complex, especially if you're using an iPad with iPadOS 18 and the Apple Pencil. So you can see all the problems I did here with graphs and everything. So I did make a full dedicated video on this for the iPad. So I will leave that linked up in the cards and down in the description below if you want to learn more about it. And you'll also notice that we have a new app icon for the calculator app. We also have some changes in the Maps application. So first off, you can see just a couple of UI changes here. You'll notice that the path right here is a lot more prominent in iOS 18. Also, the point of interest here, the Upper Yosemite Fall trailhead, has a white outline around it. It also has a more of a kind of gradient logo there. It looks a lot more alive and less flat than it looked in iOS 17. You could see that for pretty much all the points of interest as well. So Camp 4 down there also has a similar style where the text is bigger and the POI icon there has a white outline around it. And if you look right here, we have this little plus button, and that will add this to your library. So before you had to add to favorites, that was all the way down here at the bottom, but now it's up here along with an animation when you press on that. And if you look closely at the X and the share buttons, they appear to be slightly larger than in iOS 17. Also up here, these buttons right up here in the top right appear to be slightly taller and kind of bigger as well. And if we go down, we have a couple of changes in here as well. So you can see you can now add a note. So it says only you see what you write. So you can add a note to this place. And if you go down a little bit further, we have our first major change here with Maps in iOS 18. And that is the ability for hikes and the ability to set custom routes for hikes. So before we had this section called trails, but if you went onto that, if you tapped onto that, it would basically just take you to the trail, and that was kind of it. You didn't really have much going on there. You just had photos and just basic directions. But now in iOS 18, hikes are much improved. So if we go to this white wolf right here, if we go ahead and tap on that, you can see that we get the topographic map right here, and you have a lot more details about the actual hike. It's not just like a GPS like anything else would show you. So this is awesome. It'll show you, how long it is, how long it'll take, the elevation, and you could just kind of see the graph as well as in terms of your elevation along that hike. And if you tap on the more button right here, it will show you all of the hikes in that area, and it will also show them right here. So if you zoom out, it will show you more, and they will be numbered, and that will correspond to this section. You also get some quick details about those hikes as well. Like if we go to top of Yosemite Falls, which I've done that hike, by the way, it was awesome, but you can see we get the, mapped out version of that. Now, again, you can also create custom routes for these hikes. So to do that, you just tap on the more button right here, and you'll see that we have a new option for create a custom route. And when you go there, you'll get this nice new little animation that says create a custom route. And it says tap the map to add points to your route. So if you want to choose, where you start and kind of where you go, you could just add these different points, and you can see sometimes it will say, it's impossible to go cut across there. So you will have to put it on the actual path. So you can see the white is the actual path, but if maybe it's split off in two ways, you can choose one of two ways to go back. You could also reverse, out and back, and close loop. So you can kind of have some options for your custom route as well. And this down here updates in real time as well when you tap it. So you can see everything updates in terms of the elevation, the amount of time, and the distance. And you could also undo. So if you messed up, you could just press that to undo, and you could just save this right here, or just open up the directions. And if you try to X out of that without saving, you will get a alert here, so you do not delete your route on accident. So this is excellent if you are into hiking. And if you start typing in hikes in Sequoia, for example, you can see a small difference in the color here as well. So the glyph icons to the left are now brighter in iOS 18 compared to what they were in iOS 17. And if we go into here, you can see a difference in the results as well. So in iOS 17, it just showed you these results here that were kind of just, scraped from the web, but now it's a lot more refined in iOS 18. And before, you could only search by best match, distance, and ratings, but you can see now you have a lot more options in iOS 18 in terms of which hikes you want to go on. So you can choose the length, you could choose the route type, and you could also filter it by elevation gain. So if you only wanted to see hikes that are 2,000 feet or more in terms of elevation, you can see those show up right here on the map. So a lot more granular control over what you see when you search for hikes. And Apple says that this feature works for thousands of hikes across national parks. It's not just in California. You can see this in other national parks as well. And you could also create custom routes for walking anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a national park or for a hike. And like I mentioned earlier, we do have topographic maps in iOS 18 now. So you can see the topography here in iOS 18 versus nothing in iOS 17. So a lot more detail there when you have mountains. And if you download a map for offline use, we have a change here as well. So first off, you can see under automatic updates, we now have a description underneath of it. Also before, the last updated was in a different section underneath of this, but now it is right underneath of update all in this main section here. And the offline maps can also now sync with your Apple Watch, which is a really big benefit if you wear an Apple Watch, especially on a hike. And if you search for something in maps like gas station or Mexican food in this example, and you want to see what's nearby, you can see a couple of changes here as well. So first off, the bubbles now have a slightly different color. So it's slightly lighter. It's kind of less saturated than it was on iOS 17. Also, if you look at the UI here, that's different. So you can now type in to Mexican food right there. You can add on to it. Whereas before you had to tap on edit search, and it was a whole debacle there to edit the search. So it opened up this full menu. It was a lot less, it was kind of more clunky than it used to be. And you can see it just got rid of my search right there. So that was annoying in iOS 17, much better here in iOS 18. Also, this menu looks a lot better, and you can, have more options to filter the search results. And you'll also see a difference in the cards as well. So now it's better fitted on the screen. So before it just went across the entire screen, it wasn't really structured, but now we have a white background and it's more structured and clean on the screen. Also, the Yelp reviews look better. So everything is a clean gray, whereas before we had these really ugly orange stars that showed up right here, and it also said on Yelp. Now it just says Yelp. And a small change you'll notice here as well is that before, if something was closed, like if a restaurant was closed, it would just say closed and that was it. But now in iOS 18, it tells you when they open in the red font. So you don't have to read the hours afterwards. It just shows you in the red text there that says close till 11 a.m., close till 12 p.m., and so on. Also, the pictures over here are larger than they were in iOS 17. And if you zoom out a little bit, you can see we have a new search here button. So now, it won't get rid of everything, but you can go ahead and tap on search here if you want to, confirm that decision to zoom out right there. So it searches automatically, but if you go, down and away, you will have the option to search here and it will keep all those results up there. And just to compare in iOS 17, if you did that, you can see it would always just go with you wherever you went. So you couldn't really look around without it changing, your results. So now you can kind of look around the area and not lose all the results you had there. And we do also have a new app icon for the Maps application. So in the settings application, we have a lot of changes. So first off, right away when you open up settings, the search bar shows up by default. Before, you had to swipe down for that to show up. And then right below that, we have the section for our Apple account, and we have more padding on the top and bottom of this section. Also, our name is now bold. And then underneath of that, it now says Apple account instead of Apple ID. And it no longer says media and purchases. It just says and more. Also, that font is a different color. It's a gray color instead of being black and matching the name of our account. And then the family text is a little bit further to the left than it was in iOS 18. Now, if we go into our Apple account, we have even more changes. So first off, if we go into the iCloud section, this has been completely redesigned. So pretty much everything, as you can see, has been changed here for the better, in my opinion. So we now have an iCloud subscriber. If you are subscribed to iCloud, you'll get this new little badge up in the top right. You have your storage, 1.3 terabytes out of 2 terabytes. We have our saved to iCloud section right here, which is very convenient. Before, we just had this little section that said apps using iCloud. And if you went into show all, you just had an on or off switch. Now it shows by default, like at a glance, everything that's saved to iCloud, along with the amount of space that it takes up or how many items are in there. And if you go into that section, this has also been changed. So before it was apps using iCloud, now it's just saved to iCloud. And you can see the difference here as well, because it will show the amount of storage it takes up. Whereas before it did not say that. It would just tell you what it is and if it was on or off. And then if you went into there, that's when you could finally see how much storage it took up. And then if you go down to the iCloud backup, you can see at a glance if that failed or if that was successful based on the color of the button. So it's red, which meant it failed. And if it was succeeded, if you succeeded on the iCloud backup, it would be green. So again, it's just easy to see everything at a glance now with iOS 18 in the iCloud section. And you'll also notice here that we have the sign in with Apple section where you can see every app you've used, the sign in with Apple functionality. Now, if we go down past that, you'll start to see some other big changes. So we now have easier access to some of our most used sections in the settings. So for example, battery is now in the first page of the menu. So the first section of the menu has battery in it, which is huge because before you had to scroll all the way down here. And Apple knows that battery is one of the most used sections in settings. So they moved that close to the top. Now, another great example of that is camera. Camera has always been way down here. I don't know why. Camera is another section that everybody goes in pretty frequently. That used to be all the way down here, not even in the first or second or third section. It was all the way down here for some reason, but now Apple moved that all the way up here to the second section, the fourth option down. And you'll notice that throughout settings. And if you go into dark mode, you'll notice that all of the app icons change to their dark mode variant, including the apps section. So if you have any third-party apps with a dark mode icon, they now show up in settings. And speaking of apps, that's another big change in iOS 18 in settings, because if you go all the way down, you'll notice that we now have an apps section. Before in iOS 17, if you wanted to get to some of your third-party apps, you would just have to keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling based on how many apps you had, and everything just showed up on this one page. But now it's more simplified because we have our own apps section. And then from here, you can search for apps, and you also have an app library-esque section over here where you can sort in alphabetical order. You could just tap or slide your finger over here to go based on the alphabetical order of those applications. If you tap on search at the top of settings, you now get suggestions up here. So maybe suggestions for settings that you might want to enter. But more importantly, we have recents. So you can now see recent menus that you've been within, which is very beneficial and very helpful if you were deep in a settings pane. Like for example, iCloud, we had to get there by going to apps, contacts, accounts, iCloud. That's deep in the settings. That's multiple button presses, but now you can get there with a tap because it's saved under recents. Now let's go back to battery because we have a big change in the battery settings here. So nothing looks different at first, but if you have an iPhone 15 series and you go into the charging section right here, we now have a change to the charge limit. So before you could only turn on, 80% charging or just 100%. But now with iOS 18, you have more granular control over what your phone charges to. So if you want to charge to 90%, you can now do that. If you want to charge to 95%, you can now do that. So you don't have the option of just 80% or 100%. You now have 3 additional options. And also in the battery section, we now have an update finishing in background prompt. So if you update your software, you will now see this prompt under battery to let you know that, the recent software update could take a toll on your battery life at first. So it says that battery life and thermal performance may improve once finished. So once the update finishes, syncing everything in the background. And this also shows up as a new section in your battery usage as well. So it shows up as device setup and updates if it's impacting your battery life after an update. You'll also now get a recommended charge limit notification. And also if you're using a slow charger, like a 5-watt charger, you'll now get a warning and it will show up a different color in your graph when you were using that slow charger. And you might have also noticed this right here under insights and suggestions. If you have your auto lock set to never, we have a new warning underneath that says it's currently turned off. You can save battery by turning it on, and you have the option to turn it on right from this section here. We also have some big changes to a lot of the menus. So if you go into general, for example, we now have a big glyph icon up top along with the name of the section and the description of that section. Also, we have multiple glyph icons in here now for pretty much everything in this menu, whereas before it looked so boring. Here on the left, it looks like an old version of iOS compared to iOS 18. So everything looks a lot better since we have those glyph icons to the left. It's crazy how big of a difference that makes. And then also if you go into the fonts section right here, you can see that we now have a new setup for this. So we have system fonts and my fonts. Whereas before, if you didn't have anything installed, it would just say open App Store. So I don't have anything installed here, but we now have this new little picker here, this new menu. So now you no longer need to go into the App Store. You can just go right here and download those fonts. And once again, if we go into some of our settings like Bluetooth, for example, you can see Bluetooth, we have the big glyph icon up top along with the description underneath. If we go into accessibility, same thing up there. We also have several glyph icon changes here as well. So VoiceOver, it's now black, same with Zoom versus a dark gray before. Spoken content has a new glyph icon. Face ID and attention is now a little bit darker than it was beforehand. And if you go into privacy and security, again, we have the big glyph icon up top, but also you can see a little bit more about each section before going into the actual menu. So for example, I can take a glance at photos and see that 10 applications have full access, 1 has limited access, and 3 have add-only access. Before I even go into there, before in iOS 17, you had to go in to see any of that. And even then, it didn't show you the full amount of applications that had access. And that really makes a difference, especially for location services. So you can see the number there before going in, which can be really helpful. Now, also, if you go into contacts, before in iOS 17, you just had this. Either something had full access to all your contacts or it had no access at all. Well, now with iOS 18, if you go in here, there's a big change. So if you go into Fantastical, you can now limit the application's access to your contacts. So if you tap on that, you will be able to choose what contacts you want the application to have access to. And you can also edit the selected contacts as well. It's no longer just either full access or none. You have more control now. And if you go down, we have this new accessories option right here. We also have some slight changes once again to the glyph icons. And if you go down further, we now have glyph icons for everything. So the analytics, advertising, the app privacy report. So it has transparency logs above it and also a glyph icon. It also now says that it's on to the right. And then also under security, we now have glyph icons for stolen device protection and for lockdown mode. And by the way, yes, that's a new location for stolen device protection that used to be under Face ID and passcode. Also, if you go into safety check, we now have a new glyph icon right here. So a slightly tweaked glyph icon along with a new description underneath. It also shows if stolen device protection is turned on. We also have a new UI for Bluetooth and network access. So they both look just like this. There's a new UI with a map and it shows the surrounding devices. In the Wi-Fi section, we have the Wi-Fi glyph along with the description of it. And if you tap on the eye next to your connected network, we have a couple of changes here as well. So first up top in the top left, the back arrow no longer has Wi-Fi text next to it. It also appears to be slightly smaller than on iOS 17. And then down here we have private Wi-Fi address. So before that was just a kill switch to turn on or off, but now we can go into there and we have the option to change this between off, fixed, and rotating. And if you set this to rotating, it will rotate your Wi-Fi address, and it basically does the same thing as iOS 17. It's just a different naming scheme and a different way to enable it. And you'll notice that there's also a description underneath as well that gives you more information about what a rotating private address does. So that will reduce tracking by periodically changing the device's Wi-Fi address on the network. And if you go into screen time and go to communication safety and you turn this on, we also have a change here as well, because this now requires the screen time password for children to view and send sensitive content. This update also includes a new repair assistant feature that allows you to configure third-party replacement parts as genuine after a repair. So you might see this in your about page. It shows configuration available for the battery, and you get the option to restart and finish the repair. So basically what this does is if you ever replaced the iPhone's battery from a third party, if you didn't go through Apple, it would always show up as a third-party part in your settings. But now you can configure it as a genuine Apple part after the device runs through the tests with this new repair assistant feature. And if you get a part replaced after installing iOS 18, that will now show up in your settings. If you go into General About, there will be a section in here called Parts in Service. And there's even activation lock for the iPhone parts now after updating to iOS 18. So Apple says that parts such as the battery, cameras, and display are now linked to your Apple account based on their individual serial numbers. And Apple's goal for this is to put an end to the market for selling parts from stolen iPhones. There's a new UI if you have an Apple Watch syncing, so it looks kind of like a dynamic island animation at the top of your phone now. Also in the Spotlight search, you just have a lot more detail here. So for example, if you search for a menu inside of settings like sounds and haptics, it will now show a description underneath of that section for settings. It will also have the corresponding glyph icon that shows up in settings, not just the basic settings icon. And it also shows, the app that it's inside right there. It has little settings in the bottom right corner of that glyph icon. And you'll notice that that corresponds throughout iOS 18 as well. Like you can see with Epidemic Sound right there, it shows the little wallet application in the bottom right. Because in iOS 17, that little glyph icon in the bottom right popped up in certain areas, but not in every area like it does in iOS 18. Now heading into the Books application, we have a couple of changes here, including a long-awaited feature. So if we go into our settings, you can see that this menu looks a little bit different. So it's a little bit more compact. And we also have smaller buttons down here at the bottom because we do also have an additional button down there, which if you tap on this will enable the line guide, which will basically just highlight certain sections of the page, and you can just tap to go to the next line. So this helps if you don't want to be overwhelmed by a page. You could just read line by line. And if you tap on this again, you will get options to dim the background more, or you can lower the background dimming as well. But the long-awaited change is inside of the Themes and Settings section. And if you go to Customize, we now have a new option if you go to Customize right here to change the margins. So before, you were not able to adjust the margins inside of the Books application, which never made any sense. But now you can do that, and you can see the live preview up top of what it looks like when you increase or decrease the margins. And then if you head into the bookstore tab, you'll notice that up top it now says sections instead of browse sections. And if you go into that section, you'll see it's changed up in the top left as well. Now if we go into the top charts here, you'll see up in the top right, we also have a change in how the charts are viewed. So before, we just had the ability to browse charts, and when you tap on that, it shows the same things, but now we just have this little drop down, and it also just says charts now instead of browse charts. And if you actually go into a book, there's a big difference here in the UI. So the UI looks a lot more modern now. You can see that the background is, a different color, and if we go to the next one, you can see that the backgrounds are different. They're much better looking. So we'll stay on this one right here, for example, and then if you scroll down, you'll see that we have book and audiobook, so they're separated in a really nice way. It also shows the amount of pages, the length, and who it's narrated by, all right there with big buttons to sample and preview and purchase, whereas before it just looked like this on the left. It was very mundane. And if you scroll down, it used to say publisher description. Now it says from the publisher. We also have a different color of text, and if you tap on that, it opens up in its own modal here, so it's its own little section instead of just taking up all this real estate on this actual screen here. And the customer reviews are also richer, so it shows an image right there and specifies that it's the book that the person is rating and not the audiobook. And it also has a different color for the stars. It's no longer as dark as it was in iOS 17. And you'll also notice that before, up top, the sticky little header that would follow you used to have the purchase price in the top left and an X in the top right. Now the X is in the top left, and over in the top right, we have a plus, which allows you to add it to your want to read list. And then if you tap on the three dots, you get all of these additional options here as well. And by the way, when you go to your want to read section, you will now get notifications if discounts are available for those books that you added to this list. And moving over to the audiobooks tab, again, we have a very similar theme here. It now says audiobook store instead of audiobooks. So just a minor tweak there. And it also says sections now instead of browse sections. And if you go into an audiobook, you'll see that we have that new UI here as well, like we saw for the books. Also, if you start playing an audiobook or even a sample, you can see that the now playing bar at the bottom is no longer full screen. It's more, just in this little section right here. It looks a little bit more modern and better. And then if you go to the search tab, it now shows a trending genre and the books that are trending in that genre. And then the final change is under the home section. If you go down to the very bottom, we now have books read this year. So it shows that 3 more books are needed to reach my goal. And you can tap on that and you can adjust the goal for how many books you want to read in a year. We have quite a few changes in the wallet application. So if you tap on the plus icon here and go to add a debit or a credit card and go to continue, you might see a new UI for adding a card where you can use NFC to just tap your iPhone to the card and it will insert your information without you having to scan it or enter your details manually. And if you go to your Apple Cash card and you go to send or request, we have a new option called tap to cash, and this allows you to simply tap another phone to send them money. So it works very similar to how we have name drop, where you can just exchange contact information or exchange photos by just putting 2 phones together. Well, you can now do that in iOS 18 for paying somebody. So if you want to pay somebody $10, you can do that, tap next, and then you can go ahead and put your phones together and you will pay them via tap to cash. And by the way, you could also add tap for cash in the control center. So you can now access that and pay somebody easily by simply tapping on this button. Also now with Apple Pay, if you go to pay for something and you want to change your payment method, there's now an option for change payment method, whereas before you had to tap on the card. So now if you tap on Apple Card, you just get the option to change the billing address, not the payment method. And just a quick shout out to the Rewind wallpapers as well. If you want to get these classic looking wallpapers, this is where you can grab them on brandonbutch.com. I'll leave it linked in the description below as well. They're pretty awesome wallpapers if I do say so myself. And if you buy tickets for a game or a concert, that now has a new UI in Apple Wallet. It shows the stadium details, recommended Apple Music playlists, and more. And if you have an Apple Card, there's a nice new change that's coming with iOS 18. It's a small one, but a nice quality of life change. And you will see this right away. So when you go to, let's just go to our month view right here, you'll see that we now have up and down arrows along with how much more or how much less we spent based on the previous period. So under total spending, you can see we have an up arrow and it shows I spent $97 more than last month at this time. And if we go down, it gets even more specific under categories. So it shows which categories you were spending more or less on. This is very helpful when budgeting. And here's a better example of an entire month. So you can see that before we did have the up arrow that said plus 20% over last month, but we didn't have the specifics right here like it shows now. And again, it didn't show everything under categories. Now, if you go to the widgets and go to add an Apple Card widget, you'll notice that we have a new option here at the end for connected accounts. So you can now add a connected accounts widget to your home screen. And when you go onto this, you can go ahead to edit and choose the account that you want to be there if you have a connected account. Also with iOS 18, you have access to more financing options. So if your bank supports it, you can now redeem your rewards points, and also you can access loan installments directly from the wallet. But again, that's going to depend on your specific bank. And here's another interesting feature in iOS 18. So there's a new fraud prevention feature for adding digital ID. So if you go to plus right here and you go to driver's license or state ID, if you have a compatible state, there are now new preventative measures to ensure you are not, claiming you're somebody you're not. So before, you had to scan the front and back of your physical ID and also capture a video of your face, turning left and right. But now in iOS 18, to make it even more fraud proof, you have to capture a live photo instead of or in addition to a submitted video. So you might have to shoot a live photo and a video just to ensure you're who you say you are. Since this is basically a driver's license, it's a serious deal, much more serious than say a credit card. This update also brings a nice change to the journal application, which is one of the most underrated Apple apps by far. So I know it's pretty new, but still it doesn't get talked about as much. It's pretty awesome. So you'll notice right away the big difference here between iOS 17 and iOS 18, and that is up top. We now have stats, so it feels like you're being more productive when you write in your journal. It actually makes a big difference in terms of just mentally feeling like, you're doing something good by writing down in your journal. It'll show that we have 8 entries this year. We've written 766 words, and we've journaled for 13 days. So you have your stats up there. You'll also notice up top, we have a search bar and then these 3 dots where we can sort by, and we also have other options here as well. And before, if you tapped on that section in iOS 17, which looked a little bit different, you only had the option to search for bookmarked photos, videos, and you can see the rest. So now we have more options. We have a new way to sort by, and we also have glyph icons next to all of these options. And by the way, if we go into insights right here, you'll see that we have our streaks. So again, just things that make you feel better about writing in the journal application, like you're accomplishing something, which you should feel when you're doing this. So it shows insights right here. It shows your stats, how many days you've journaled, how many times you've, traveled or visited somewhere. And you can even see a calendar here as well with a little dot underneath of it based on when you entered in something into your journal. Now, if you go to add a new journal entry, you'll see a couple of changes here as well. So first off, we now have a title. So it starts off with a title, and then you could start writing underneath of that. Also down here, we have a couple of changes in this little tab bar. So the first thing you'll notice is that we have these 2 A's on the far left. If you tap on that, we now have formatting options inside of Journal. So you can kind of see an example of some of the formatting that I've done here. Now, of course, we can also bold things, so we can make certain things bold. So if you want to make kind of like a little header within your journal entry, you can do that right there. We can also italicize, underline, strike through, and we also have these other options as well. We can change the text color as well of just a specific word, and you can just do a lot more. It's just so much more rich now than iOS 17. And then the other big change is on the far right. So on the far left and the far right are where we have our 2 new options. And this is for logging your state of mind. So previously, you could only log your state of mind in the health application or on your Apple Watch. But now you can do that straight from within the journal application, and also it will count towards your, mindful minutes in the health application. So the amount of time you spend typing in the journal will count towards your mindful minutes in health, which is awesome. So we can go ahead and we'll just do pleasant for today, and we'll just do excited, and we'll just do done right there. And now we get the animation, it's logged, and it goes, and it's kind of tied with this journal entry now. And as you probably saw earlier, when you tap on done, you can see this from the main view as well. So you can also see all the bold, the different colors, all the markup options there from this view as well. And I did mention it briefly, but we do also have the search right here. And when you go into that, you can break down if you want to search for, bookmarked places, reflections, whatever, or you could just search for groceries, for example, and the search is really good in Journal. You could also record a voice note inside of your Journal application, and it will transcribe it for you as well. So you can see what that looks like up here. And if you tap on that and go to the annotation button down here, it will show you the transcription. And if you ever wanted to export and print your journal entries, you can do that as well by tapping on the three dots and then going to print, and you get the typical print view right here, and you can see what that journal entry will look like when printed out. And then we also get new home screen widgets for the journal application. So you can now quickly tap on a widget from your home screen to enter in a new entry. So you have two views for new entry. And then we also have my personal favorite, which is streaks. So this will show the number of days the streak you're on, and also a quick button below to add a new entry from there as well. And it opens up in this view. And here's something that Apple doesn't do every year. We have a big change to the fitness application on iOS 18. So first off, you can see up in the top right here, it used to say activity, but now it's activity rings, and it's in a little widget now. It's smaller, and also the wording is kind of connected here, whereas before it was outside of that little circle that it's in. And that's because we now have a change to the entire summary view. So before, we were just kind of stuck with this view and there was nothing you could really do about it. But now in iOS 18, it will show our step count, step distance, our sessions, trainer tips, all of that. And I've actually tweaked this. I've actually made this look how I want it to look. And you can do that as well by going down to the bottom and going to edit summary. And this allows you to have a very widget-esque screen here for the summary view. Now we also have the add button up in the top left. So if you tap on that, you will get the option to choose any of these new cards. So I have pretty much all of them added here, but you can see we have different versions of each of these cards as well. So you could add those from there. So let's just say we want to add training load, for example. I'll go ahead and add this card, and it will now show up right here at the bottom. And you could also tap on any of these to see if there are variations, because there will be different variations of these widgets, different type of views that you can, we made that smaller right there for the awards, for example. So if we want to make sessions bigger, let's see if we can do that. Yes, we can. So we could do that, and we can swap that card and make it a little bit bigger. We could also move these around as well. So it's much more customizable than it's ever been. And down here we have see all categories. If you go into that, you can now see all of your categories in one list view, which is very helpful. And if you go into the activity rings, we now have these new options to the right of move, exercise, and stand. And this allows you to change the goal for today or change your schedule. So you could adjust the goal for today, which you could do that before, but you could see there's a minor change here in the UI. It now says today's move goal instead of your daily move goal, and also a change to the text below that. Also, the card down here has green text instead of white, and we no longer have that little, byline at the bottom there. But the big change in iOS 18, and this is also for watchOS 11 as well, is that you can change your goal schedule. So now you could have it set that every Saturday and Sunday, in my example, I only have to hit 310 calories instead of 500 calories. So if I don't want to work as much on a certain day, I can do that. I can set that right there. So I don't have to exercise as much on the weekends. So we can set that, and you can see you can do it for exercise and for stand as well. And then also down here is another big change, and that is the ability to pause your rings. So if you get injured or if you get sick, you can now pause your rings for a set amount of time, up to 90 days. And this will allow you to retain your streaks so you don't lose them while you're sick or injured. And also down at the bottom, we now have an add to your rings section that shows you some suggested workout apps. Now, if we head over to the Apple Fitness Plus tab, we have a change here as well. So before, this is what the UI looked like, but now with iOS 18, we have this top tab bar. So before, we just had these little options here, but now we have a dedicated nav bar up top where we can go to For You, we can go to Explore, Library, and also Search in this nice little bar up here. Before, that was kind of just hidden all the way down here at the bottom. And if you go to the library view, you can see that we now have recently added, and also the downloaded glyph icon is slightly different. So the cloud used to be filled in, now it is not. And you could also now search. So if you know exactly what you want to search for in terms of a workout or a trainer, you can search for that right here. Now moving on to the health application, we have several changes in here as well. We also have a pretty fundamental change to the way that the summary view works on this front page here. So you'll notice right away that we have a text change. So it used to be favorites, now it's pinned. And that's because now when you tap on edit, you no longer select your favorites and they just go in whatever order of the alphabet they're in. You now pin different activities or different things that you want to track, like your body measurements, cycle tracking, and so on. And you can move them around. So if I add swimming strokes, for example, and I go here, I can move where that shows up on my summary view. And even from the summary view, you can move these around as well, kind of like they're widgets. Again, very similar to what we just saw in the fitness application. Because in iOS 18, let's say I wanted cycling distance to be at the very top. If I favorite it right here and I go back in, it will never be at the top as long as I have activity there, because everything shows up in alphabetical order. So it was not very customizable at all in iOS 17, but now it is in iOS 18 with the addition of pinning. Now we also have some changes in the activity. So if we go into our activity right here, if you look closely underneath of this section, you'll see that the move, exercise, and stand text is now outside of the box, whereas before it was inside of one big box. So these are all three separated now, and the text is outside of them. And the same goes with the text over here as well for the calories, minutes, and hours. And if you tap your profile picture up in the top right and you go into medical ID, this has been redesigned. So before it looked like this on the left. Now in iOS 18 up top, we have emergency access and share during emergency calls. So both of those are up top now. And then below that, we have a much better, kind of way to just view your information. So before it just showed like this, now we have a much more rich card here for showing our personal information for medical ID. And up top, you'll notice that the medical ID text is smaller and it's all red now, whereas before medical ID was in black. And it's also just easier now to add allergies, conditions, and notes, and also delete your medical ID, whereas before you had to go into the edit screen and this is how it looked. Just a lot better in iOS 18. In the health records screen, we have a slight redesign here. So up top, we have a smaller card with a much smaller Get Started button, and also a new glyph over there to the left. Underneath of that, it now says apps instead of apps and services. And if you go into organ donation, you can see that this is also a smaller card with a smaller and a slightly new design for the sign up with donate life button. And you'll also see down here that apps and services is now just apps. So Apple has changed the wording for that. And if you go into your health details section, we have a new button here for setup, pregnancy, and cycle tracking. So if you're currently pregnant, you can add this and you'll be able to track your pregnancy symptoms, and this will also display your gestational age along with an analysis of the symptoms that you record. And we also get some additional widgets for the lock screen. So if you go here, you can see that we now have these two sizes for overnight vitals and weekly vitals. And the medications and state of mind options have changed places. And also if you go into the vitals section, you can see that we now have our new vitals right here. So we have a new application on watchOS 11 called Vitals, and this will track your, nightly vitals as long as you're wearing your Apple Watch to bed. So it will show you if something is high, typical, or low, and what may have caused that. So it will show if you have an outlier, and you can see right here, we had an outlier. So we can tap on that to see more information. So it looks like sleep duration was my outlier, and if you tap on that, it will give you an explanation for what might have caused that to be an outlier. And if you go over my last 6 months, you can see that I've had 7 outliers for sleep duration and 1 outlier for heart rate. So if I tap on the heart rate, for example, it will tell me factors that may cause an increase and may cause a decrease. And you can see also on the chart, where that was. It looks like it was right here. And if you're wondering how this works, I did explain this in my watchOS video, but it tells you right here. So it's a collection of measurements such as your heart rate, respiratory rate, and wrist temperature that are taken by your Apple Watch as you sleep. And it will combine all that together to basically form a medium, and it will determine, if you're going above or below your median, or I should say a baseline range as Apple calls it. And something else that's in watchOS 11, but I'll mention it here because this is also in the health application, is that we now have this little gap that you'll see here in the sleep section in your health, and that signifies a moment where your watch was tracking your sleep even though you were not in a sleep schedule and not in a sleep focus mode. So basically, if you fall asleep before you mean to, or if you take a nap throughout the day, those will now be logged and will count towards your amount of sleep that you're getting. It just won't be able to track, your REM, core, deep sleep, and so on. It's just going to show this big little bar here to indicate and at least give you credit for sleeping. And then here's a potentially life-saving feature that's coming in iOS 18, and this is Emergency SOS Live Video. So this allows you to share context through streaming video and recorded media. So Apple says that in the middle of an emergency call, participating emergency dispatchers can send a request for you to share a live video or media from your camera roll over a secure connection, again, using Emergency SOS and the satellite. So that is amazing. Just picture somebody is stuck or trapped, in a mountain and it's daytime, and maybe, they can't describe what they're seeing around them. If they can take a live video, maybe the emergency personnel can determine where they're at. So in addition to kind of, their GPS location. So that's a potentially life-saving feature that's also coming with iOS 18. Now, if you're an accessibility user, you are going to love iOS 18 because we get several big new additions to accessibility. So first off, you can see in the settings menu, we now have that typical big glyph and the description underneath, whereas before we just had nothing. We have a slight change to the spoken content glyph icon. And then the first new option you'll see down here is eye tracking. So now in iOS 18, you have eye tracking, and this allows you to control your device using just your eyes, which is pretty incredible. Now, it doesn't work as good as the Vision Pro. Don't expect it to work as good as that, but it's still pretty amazing. So I'm just going to go ahead and enable this and show you that this is how you set it up. So you just have to follow your eyes on the screen. So follow the dot with your eyes only. So if you move your eyes, of course, you do need to bring your face into view. So you'll see this new pop-up there if you do that. So I'm just going to run through this. Okay, so now you can see that I'm controlling my iPhone with just my eyes. So I do have to hold it at this view so that the front-facing camera has a visual on my eyes. But for example, if I want to pull down the control center up here, I could just go look over with just my eyes and keep holding, and you will notice that we have that little drop down there. So this is going to actually take me to my home screen. So we're going to go back. So you can use your hands at the same time. You don't have to just use your eyes, but you can just use your eyes if you would want to. And you also have the option for smoothing. You have snap to item, zoom on keyboard keys, dwell control, and auto hide. So we're going to turn dwell control right back on. You can also press this button right here, and this will pull up, your options for notification center, Siri, device, control center, all of that. Now, another feature that I think will be more useful for the majority of people is going to be under speech, and that is vocal shortcuts. So this allows you to choose a custom phrase to perform a Siri request or a shortcut action. And this can be very powerful. So for example, if you turn this on, which by the way, when you turn this on, you will always see that orange dot in your dynamic island. And that's because, you are using the microphone at all times. Now, I have been testing this to see if it drains battery, and I have not found any indication that it drains battery while having this on. So for example, you can see I have 3 different actions set up. So take a look at what happens when I just say screenshot. You can see it will take a screenshot. So it does have a slight delay depending on what you do. Now, for example, if I say, showtime, it will turn on all my lights. Or if I say undo, it will basically mimic a shake on the device. So let's say I type out something and then I delete it on accident, but I want to undo that. All I have to do is say undo. And you can see it will undo that typing just from saying that. And I didn't even have to say Siri or anything else. I just set that up as an action right here. So to do this, just go to add actions and it says set up vocal shortcuts. So we're going to go to continue. And now you get to choose what you want to do. So again, you can have a Siri request. So let's just say that our Siri request, which is what you would basically say to Siri anytime you want to perform an action on your phone, you basically just put it in writing right here. So if I were to tell Siri, set a 15-minute timer, I'm just typing that out here as my Siri request. So we're going to type that out and now we're going to add our custom phrase. So I'll just say timer, for example. So now when we tap on go, we will have to say that 3 times. There we go. And it says action is ready and you can add another one, but we're just going to try this out real quick. So let's try it here. Timer. And you can see it will set that timer. You will even see the Siri pop up right here to indicate that it performed that Siri request for you. Pretty awesome. So let's go and add an even more advanced one. So you could also choose from shortcuts. So if you want to choose an action to run a shortcut, you can do that. Or also you can go down here to below this and we have different system functions. So if you get past your shortcuts, you'll see we have accessibility. So you have all these accessibility options. And my favorite right here is under system because you can mimic system actions like pressing the action button. You can mimic that with your voice, flashlight, home, mute, notification center, Siri, spotlight, you name it. So I already showed you the screenshots, so let's try something else. Let's try control center. And one thing I've learned after testing this out for a couple of months is that you do not want to add in a phrase that you say all the time. Like I'm just adding some simple ones just for demo purposes, but you want to add something like controllable or something that you don't say very often. That way you can avoid accidental triggers. So I'll say controllable. That's not something I say all the time. So that can be what I say to pull down the control center with just my voice. Controllable, and it will pull down my control center, and you can see up top it does say, the phrase that we said to invoke that. We also have music haptics, so this will allow you to get haptic feedback for music, both in the music application and in Apple Music Classical. So if you're, hard of hearing or if you are deaf, you can now hear the music instead of just listening to it, especially if you cannot actually listen to it. So that is an awesome feature. You can also access that from the control center as well. So here's what that icon looks like. Now, if you go into the motion section right here, we have a really awesome new feature as well called show vehicle motion cues. So this is a new feature that will basically help if you get motion sick in a car. So if you go into here, you have the option to turn this to automatic. So it will automatically turn on if a vehicle motion is detected, like if it detects if you're in a vehicle, especially in the back seat, or you could always have it turned on or always turned off. So if I turn this on, you will see that we get this badge up top, and now we have these little black dots around the screen that will help with, motion sickness. So I don't get motion sick myself, but if, for people that do, they've said that this actually does help with, reducing the amount of motion sickness while in a car. So we do also have a control center toggle for that right here. And you can see kind of what that looks like along with the little glyph icons to the right. And in the motion section in accessibility, you can see a couple of changes here as well. So dim flashing lights has been moved up, and also the autoplay items here are all together now, whereas before they were separated, 2 up here and then 1 way down here. So now they're separated and also in a different order. And there's also a new option for prefer non-blinking cursor. So before, you know this already, but you can see that you have a blinking cursor when you're waiting to type. But if you turn this on, you will not have that. It will not blink. It will just be a solid line there even after you type. And inside of the audio and visual tab, we have a new option for add voice isolation. And this is mainly for the Apple TV application and when you're using the enhance dialogue feature. So this will add an additional option to enhance dialogue, and it will basically isolate the dialogue from like an action scene, for example. So you hear the voices just as good as you hear the action in the background, if not better. There's a slight change to the glyph icon for audio descriptions. Same with Face ID and attention. The switch control icon is darker. It's like black now instead of being gray. We no longer have the Apple TV remote, keyboards, and AirPods section underneath of physical and motor. Those have been moved down here to their own menu labeled accessories. The audio and visual glyph icon has been changed. So the eye is to the right now instead of underneath underneath, and we also no longer have the little waves coming out of the speaker. The background of live captions is now black instead of gray. Same with live speech, and also down here with guided access, it's now black instead of a dark gray. And if you go into voiceover, we now have a new button for voiceover tutorial, and also the speaking rate has been moved down. Now, as far as voiceover goes, we have multiple changes in iOS 18. So I'm going to separate this from accessibility since this is the most used accessibility feature. This is going to have its own section here. So we have multiple changes here. So let's start in the speech tab. So you'll notice that now we have our primary voice up here, and it says Samantha, and it says enhanced. So if you go into that right here, if you go into this option, we have the ability to change the voice. You could just see the overall layout is so much better now in iOS 18. And if we were to go into Samantha before, that is what it looked like. Here's what it looks like in iOS 18. Before, this is all you could change, but now you have the option to change the rate, the pitch, and the volume for that specific voice. You also have an equalizer down here, so you can change the ultra lows, lows, mids, and highs. And you have the option to preview this voice by tapping the play button up in the top right corner. And you also have an option to reset voice settings down here, which will revert everything back to default. You can also now have additional voices in additional languages as well. So for example, if you have a primary voice right here, you could add a secondary voice that's also in English, maybe just a different, person, a different tone, or you could have it set to be in a different language. So if I go down here and just choose Croatian, for example, I can choose one of these to add as my secondary language. So now if we go back, we have Lena underneath of additional voices. And if you ever want to rename one of these voices, you can do that very easily by tapping right here and going to rename. And if you go down here to pronunciations, you can go ahead and add a pronunciation, and you will notice that there's a change in this section as well. So you have your phrase and your substitution along with an enhanced description underneath, so slightly different description. And then also apply to all apps is selected by default, but you also have the option now to see all of the applications down here, and you can tap on a specific application to only apply it to those applications as well. So for some reason, it does not uncheck apply to all applications when you do that, but this whole menu now shows up without having to disable apply to all apps. Now, as far as Braille goes, we have multiple changes to Braille as well. So up top, you can see that the glyph icon to the left is now smaller and it's also blue. Below that, we have a new option for matching input and output tables. So if you go into Braille tables, for example, you can see how that looks right there. So if we go to our selected one, you now have the option to choose between any of these. There's a new option for automatic translation, so everything will be translated automatically. If you go into Braille screen inputs, we have multiple new changes here as well. So before we just had uncontracted and contracted Braille and reverse dot positions, but now we have all of these different settings. So you can use activation gestures, you can start automatically when editing text, keep active until dismissed. You can reverse the dot positions. You get visual text feedback if you turn this option on. And we also have different things down here as well, like our typing feedback, mode announcements, and choosing a Braille table from this menu. And there are multiple other specific changes to Braille as well. So if you go to what's new in VoiceOver right here, if you tap on that under the main VoiceOver page and go down, we have a section here for what's new with Braille in iOS 18. So you can see things like Japanese kanji conversion, you can see the sound haptics, 6-dot cells with Braille screen inputs, all of that right here. And then moving on to VoiceOver recognition, we have a big change here because we have live recognition. So this will use your iPhone to describe objects and environments around you in real time. So if you go into here, you can have it recognize people, doors, scenes, point and speak, text, and furniture. This can also be triggered with a 4-finger triple tap. Under that, we can see that verbosity and audio have now been added to this menu instead of being separated. And if you go into the audio tab, audio ducking is no longer just a kill switch. You can go into here and customize that so you can have it set to be off when speaking or always, and you can also change the VoiceOver speech volume. And there's also a couple of new rotor items as well. So toggle live regions and announcements is new, as is live recognition. We have some nice changes to the home application. So if you have a HomeKit lock, you will see this pop up that says home key and express mode. So this allows you to basically unlock your lock without having to tap your phone or your Apple Watch up against it. It will detect you coming using ultra-wideband technology. Now keep in mind, this does require the lock to also support UWB. So if it doesn't have ultra-wideband, it's not going to work, but this will still pop up for it for some reason. Like my lock doesn't have ultra-wideband, but I still got this pop-up. Now here's a nice new change in iOS 18. If you tap on the three dots up in the top right and go to Home Settings, right here underneath of People, when you go to Invite People, we have a new option for Guest. So now with iOS 18, you can give guests temporary access to your smart locks, your garage door opener, and your alarm systems at select times. So if you go to guest right here, you will be able to add in their phone number or name from the contacts. Let me do that. So there we go. We have our guest. And when you go to next, you can now customize their access. So let's say that we have Mary, the pet sitter, who's coming to watch our dog, and she comes twice a week. So now you can give Mary access to the front door just those 2 days of the week. So you can go to the guest schedule here and you can go to specific days and times. So if we go to times, for example, we can deselect all day and we can choose only the hours that Mary will be coming to and leaving the house. So let's say that she comes every morning at 9 a.m. and then leaves at 5 p.m. Let's just say that she's watching the dog for 2 days while somebody's at work. And we can set that to be only for specific days of the week. So if you go to every week, you can repeat this on, let's just say, Monday and Thursday. So we'll deselect everything else. So now Monday and Thursday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Mary has access to my lock. And you could also add more times as well if maybe somebody else comes, at the same time, or if you need to add another day or whatever else to Mary's schedule, you can do that right there. And now you can see you have that set up, and then you can just send the invite link. So this is going to make your HomeKit experience a lot better when it comes to guests who come to your house frequently. Now here's another big change in the home application, and this has to do with home hubs. So now in iOS 18, you can choose your preferred home hub. So if you go into the Home Hubs and Bridges section, we have a new kill switch here for automatic selection. So it shows that right now my Apple TV is the active home hub, but if we disable this, we can choose what our preferred home hub is. So you can see that all of our home pods show up right here, and it shows the Apple TV, which is probably the right choice, but if you wanted to change that, you can. You could also now pair Matter accessories without a home hub via Thread. Now when it comes to energy, if you go to the energy section right here, we have a new option to connect your energy account. So this allows you to connect to your energy company for specific usage data and statistics. So right now, this is only available for select, carriers. Right now, it's only for Pacific Gas and Electric, but this will be rolling out to more in the future. So you can see PG&E right here is the only one that's available, but this can be pretty awesome. And then we also have a change when it comes to adding accessories. So now with iOS 18, apps are able to offer an AirPods-like pairing for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi accessories. So they'll be able to have where it just pops up, you don't need to add an accessory, you don't need to scan anymore. Now developers will be able to offer that instant pop-up where when you take it out of the box, it will pop up like AirPods and you'll be able to set it up. And later this year, you'll also be able to have robot vacuums in the home application. So if you have a HomeKit enabled robot vacuum, that will be controllable from the home app. In the clock application, if you set a stopwatch, you can see that it now shows up as a dynamic island little animation here. So if you go ahead and haptic press on that, you can add a lap by doing like that. You can pause it, you can cancel, and you can resume from here as well. And of course, this does also show up here on the lock screen. This update also brings a game mode. So if you go into a game, let's go into Call of Duty, for example, you can see up top, we now have a little alert that says game mode. And you could also access this by pulling down the control center and tapping right here, and you will see the kill switch for game mode. So it's on by default, but you can turn that off if you would like to. And it says when game mode is on, background activity is reduced to optimize the performance of this game. Now also when you have game mode on, that will improve latency with connected AirPods and Bluetooth controller. So it is recommended to stay on. Also, your in-game voice quality is going to improve if you use AirPods when gaming online. So that's been improved to 16-bit 48 kilohertz. The Translate application has a few changes, and that starts with the app icon. So we now have a new app design for the Translate application. And if we go into there, we have some changes here as well. So first off, we now have support for the Hindi language. So you can now translate to and from Hindi. And then if you go to the Translate icon in the control center, we now have this animation up top for all devices that have a dynamic island. It's not just for the action button devices. So this was limited to the 15 Pro and newer before, but now it works on any device with a dynamic island. We also have live text support for Arabic and Thai. The Slovenian language is supported, and you can now set that as your primary language. And the live text feature is now available in Arabic and Thai. We have some changes in the Apple TV application. So you can see that underneath of the title, the text right here is a little bit thicker, and it's also a different shade of gray. And if you go down and tap on one of the cast members, it will show this right here, and you can see it now says the name of the person. So Adam Scott up in the top middle, whereas before it was a big header in the top left. And you can also just see we have a new animation when we go into there. So it kind of pops out instead of just sliding over like we had in iOS 17. And then if you're watching something and you tap on the three dots right here, you can see that the menu has changed. So before it was playback speed, languages, and subtitles. Now it's playback speed, audio, and subtitles. And if we go into audio, we now have the ability to enhance dialogue. And if you drop that down, we have isolate. So now you can set enhance dialogue for isolate, boost, or enhance. But what's even better is that now we have a new feature called Insight. So this shows up at the bottom when you're watching a show or a movie. And if you tap on that, that will show you who's currently on screen. So for example, it shows the actor and the actress who are currently showing on screen. And of course, if that scene changes, this will update in real time. Now, if music is playing, it will also show that music. So let me show you an example of that. So when there's music playing, you will see this little card down here that shows the name of the song along with the album artwork. And you could also press on plus to add it to your library without ever even having to leave the TV application. That is awesome. Also, these subtitles will automatically turn on if you mute the movie or the show. And then we also have a minor change on the episode page. So once again, the text underneath the name of the episode title is a little bit thicker than before. And it also looks like the resume episode button is slightly larger as well. In the shortcuts application, we have a new UI when you go to create a new shortcut. So if we tap on the plus there, this UI looks a lot better, a lot more modern. So before you had to click on add action, basically that whole button was there. You could search and pull this up, but it was kind of hidden and out of the way. So Apple has made that easier to find, the search actions button, and there's no longer a add action blue button right here. So also the text up here has been changed, and there's no next action suggestions because nothing has been added yet. So I feel like Apple is trying to make shortcuts a lot less confusing than it already is, which is a good thing. So you also notice up top, new shortcut is now in black instead of in gray like it was in iOS 17. And if you tap on that drop down, we have a new glyph icon for choose icon. Before it was like a photos glyph, now it's this dotted square. And then when it comes to actually adding actions, before we had a little favorites menu, but now we no longer have that, but we can pin items. So if we find something that we like, we could just go ahead and press on the I right here, and we can pin that to the top. So that's already pinned. So let's just find something else. We'll just find books, for example. And if we go ahead and tap on books, and then let's just say play audiobook is something that we use frequently, we can pin that to the top. So now when we go to add any shortcut, you can see that play audiobook will always be up there at the top. So it makes it easier to access frequently used actions. And now if you want to search for an action from a specific application like settings, for example, you can see that the icon shows up bigger. And when you tap on it, this whole menu kind of remains, whereas before it would create a whole new window, just overwhelming you with all of the options for settings. So you can also search within settings. thing. So if I want to search for calls, for example, you can see I can search within that. So search is so much better now. And you'll also notice that we have a few additional actions here as well to add to your shortcuts. There's also a couple of new additions for reminders, including being able to add to a specific list. There's some small changes to the books actions, like search the books app instead of saying search in books, and then also open default collection instead of just open collection. But in my opinion, the best change in shortcuts is the ability to specify multiple conditions for if statements. So I have an if statement here added, and you can see before in iOS 17, if you added an if statement, basically you just had to go to otherwise and, add another if statement. But now you can see that we have this little plus icon next to our if statement, and you can tap on that, and that will give you more conditions. You can continue adding conditions based on, whatever you're linking this to. So you can add all these different conditions without adding additional if statements. And of course, if you tap on any, you can change that to all as well. So you can really specify what you're trying to do here. There's also some new shortcut actions. So we have a create folder action. We have the add shortcut to home screen, create iCloud link for shortcuts, and then 3 new actions for journal to create audio entry, create a message with a title, and search the journal. There's a few changes in the freeform application. So first off, we have a new feature called Scene. So this makes it easier to move around a board when presenting. So if you go up to the 3 dots right here, you can either add a scene or you can go to the Scene Navigator. So if you go to Scene Navigator, it will show you all the different scenes you've set up. And a scene is essentially just a movement to another part of the board. So if I was presenting and I was talking about test right here, but then I wanted to go to this is a slide next, I wouldn't want to sit here and slide my finger all the way over here. I would want this to be set up so that when I tapped on the next arrow, it would automatically take me to where I want to be. So let me show you an example. And our first scene is going to be this right here. And then our second scene is going to be this slide right here, but maybe we want to be zoomed out a little bit more. We can zoom out a little bit more and then set that as a scene as well. So we'll go to add scene. And then maybe for the third one, we want to zoom out a lot. So we have all 3 of these sticky notes included in that scene. So we'll go ahead again to right here and add scene. So this was our first scene. Here's our second scene, and then here is our third scene. We also have snap to grid, so you'll see the square snapping to the grid lines. There's improved diagramming, so you can now join objects together with magnetic connection lines. The math notes feature is integrated into Freeform, so if you put equals next to a math problem, it will solve it for you. And of course, it will write the result in your own handwriting. Now also, if you go up here and go to find, you can search for 5, for example, and it will recognize your handwriting now. So you can search for handwritten text. It could also be translated and copied as text. And lastly, we can also send a link to a Freeform board to anybody, and they can open it up in Freeform on their device. And if you plan on switching over from an Android to an iPhone soon, iOS 18 will make that transfer process easier. So they say that the Move to iOS interface has been updated and enhanced. Wi-Fi migration is faster using 5 gigahertz. You can now transfer data via wired connection using a USB-C to USB-C cable or USB-C to Lightning. There's also dual SIM labels when transferring, along with voice memo migration, and iOS tips will be shared during the migration process. And I know this video has been long, so if your phone is about to die, you should also know that the final feature in iOS 18 I want to mention is that you can now see the time when your iPhone is dead, but this only applies to the iPhone 15 series and newer. So that is iOS 18, and this was the movie. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is my longest video to date, the most effort I've ever had to put into a video. So I would appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up. And if you want to support, don't leave a super chat on this video. Just buy some of my wallpaper packs. I want you guys to get some value in return as well. So check out our new wallpaper collection here, Volant, and also all of my other wallpaper collections like Rewind and Opulent. So that's the best way to support if you want to do that. And you'll get some of the awesome wallpapers that I always use in my videos. And if you're looking for more videos to watch, check out my desk tour setup right here. That video was amazing. And also check out this macOS Sequoia video as well, showing everything new in that software update. Anyways, I need some sleep now. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon.